Good morning, it's 7 o'clock. On today's show, new fears over weight loss jabs. 10 people have died after reporting severe side effects.
Plus, growing reports that the government is preparing to back down on welfare reform in the face of a major Labour rebellion.
It's Thursday, the 26th of June. Your headlines. A probe is launched into why some users of weight loss drugs are suffering problems with their pancreas. The government says discussions with Labour rebels on welfare reform will continue until the vote and beyond. We'll speak to Trade Minister Douglas Alexander in the next few minutes. Nearly 500 women raised concerns about maternity care they received at the Oxford University Hospitals Trust. And Canadian Denis Villeneuve is announced as the director of the next James Bond film. Good morning to you. 10 people have died after reporting a severe side effect from weight loss injections. Doctors started offering the jabs on the NHS this week, but some patients have reported pancreas problems. Medical regulators have launched an investigation to try and understand the cause of the adverse reactions. Sadia is here with all the details of it. And Sadia, of course, it feels like this is a very new drug. It's newly available on the NHS, but talk us through all of the details and, I guess, the dates that these things have unfolded.
So weight loss jabs, a huge topic of conversation. Some people see real positive benefits with them in terms of making people look better, feel better, but there have for a while been some real concerns about their safety. They were, as you say, just rolled out on the NHS. On Monday, we started seeing the trial where there's 220,000 patients who would be offered it. That's part of a 3-year programme. And then today, these serious concerns being raised about their safety because hundreds of people have reported problems with their pancreas since taking these drugs. Now, let's be really clear. First of all, it's not since Monday that these reports had come out. This is since they were licensed. So in the case of Mounjaro, the weight loss jab that is available on the NHS, that's November 2023. And second, these problems are linked to the weight loss jabs rather than being caused by them. There isn't any evidence yet to say that they were definitely caused by them. But there have been some fatalities, and this is what's really concerning. The MHRA, which is the medicines regulatory body, says that 181 cases have been reported of pancreatic illnesses linked to tirzepatide. That is the active ingredient that's in the Mounjaro jab. They've also given some data. If you go on their website, you can look at all the other types of drugs. And if you look at Ozempic and Wegovy, 113 cases and 1 person has died. So those are the numbers that are creating some concerns.
Really fascinating, Sadia. Thanks so much. Now, there's growing reports that the Prime Minister is preparing to back down on cuts to disability benefits. Government Minister Luke Pollard told our Sophie Ridge that discussions with Labour rebels will continue until the vote and beyond.
Angela Rayner also said tonight that discussions are ongoing about any concessions. So it does sound like you're in dialogue about perhaps making changes.
Yeah, of course we are. I mean, I think there's a concern that's very valid and real for lots of my colleagues. They're not doing this to cause trouble or to be argumentative. They're doing it because they have a genuine, heartfelt concern about some of the impacts. Now, where there is concerns, that dialogue, those discussions will continue until the vote and beyond.
Amanda's here to discuss this, and one of the factors which I guess puts it up in the air exactly what the government is thinking is that the Prime Minister's been away and avoiding a lot of the kind of heat on this, but he's not going to be able to avoid it for long.
No, indeed, and I think this has been a real issue for Sir Keir Starmer in his premiership. He's been away a lot. There's been obviously a lot of international, global, major events and summits going on. He's been at NATO. He's doing fairly well by all accounts. I think even the Tories would agree that on the kind of global standing, in terms of his global standing, but coming back and he's really got a bit of a political ambush at home, perhaps really taken his eye off the ball in terms of the kind of nitty-gritty politics of his domestic agenda, because it's an absolutely whopping rebellion that's brewing here. It started off as 108 MPs signing this amendment calling for the government to drop its plans to reform welfare in the way that it was looking to do in terms of cutting payments to disabled people to try and save £5 billion. Now that the number of MPs supporting that has gone up to 126, it seems. That's despite cabinet ministers being deployed to phone round the people on the list and try and convince them that if they try and rebel over this, that they could end up triggering a leadership contest, that it could end up being seen as a confidence vote in the government, that it could, you know, pave the way to reform victory at the next election, as we've been seeing in the polling and all of that. Despite that, that message isn't really getting through to the MPs, because I think they're quite angry. They feel that number 10 just hasn't been listening to their concerns. Many of them, despite the scale of Sir Keir Starmer's majority, many of them actually have quite thin individual majorities in their own constituencies. This is the kind of thing that really takes up an MP's time, the casework, hearing from people who are some of the most vulnerable in society, 800,000 people set to lose those payments that they rely on. So many MPs really fed up with this, looking for concessions. And we heard Luke Pollard there almost making a slight sort of Freudian slip there when he was talking about discussions, seemed to be starting to say concessions. And I think that is something that the government will be looking at doing, whether that's perhaps delaying the implementation of this or trying to bring forward some of the money that they're putting towards helping people find work, which, of course, that's what they say this is all about. They say they need to fix the broken system. Get more people back into work. But if they don't do that, a defeat on this with such a big majority, a third of his MPs against it, that'll be a very humiliating moment for the Prime Minister.
Amanda, stick around, because we've got another story we want you to talk to us about as well. But just a reminder, by the way, we're going to be talking to the government at 7:15, about 10 minutes' time. We'll be talking to Douglas Alexander, and, of course, that topic will be top of the agenda. Now, let's touch on the NATO summit over the last 2 days as well. And one of the standout moments was when Secretary-General Mark Rutte referred to the US President Donald Trump as Daddy. Here is a listen to that.
And Daddy has to sometimes use strong language to
you have to use strong language. Every once in a while you have to use a certain word.
Well, Deborah Haynes followed up on that topic at the press conference.
Mark Rutte, the NATO chief, who is your friend, he called you Daddy earlier. Do you regard your NATO allies as kind of children?
No, he likes me. I think he likes me. If he doesn't, I'll let you know. I'll come back and I'll hit him hard, okay? No? He did it very affectionately. Daddy, you're my daddy.
Do you regard your NATO allies, though, as kind of like children, and they're obviously listening to you and they're spending more, and you're obviously appreciative of that, but do you hope that actually they're going to be able to defend themselves, defend Europe on their own?
I think they need help a little bit at the beginning, and I think they'll be able to, and I think they're going to remember this day. And this is a big day for NATO.
Do you think they can do it without you, though, in the future? Can they do it without
Well, ask Mark.
States?
I mean, you have to ask Mark, okay?
Great work from Deborah Haynes there yesterday. And it continued when President Trump landed back in the US. The White House tweeted this out with the words, "Daddy's home." And, I mean, firstly, as I said, Amanda, great work from Deborah Haynes, and a really genuine back and forth with the president there, which is obviously rare at these press conferences even to get a question. What I think is interesting, the jokes part of it aside, and it is pretty amusing, you know, again, we said this earlier about his comments towards Putin and Zelensky, and in general, the comments towards NATO allies. You know, you could say this daddy-children thing isn't particularly heartwarming to NATO, but his comments were kind of supportive overall. And you know, I had a question coming in is, will this 5% on national security, which obviously isn't pure defence spending, be read by him as this is smoke and mirrors, it's not until 2035, it's actually only 3.5% on defence, or would he use it to go home and say, look what I got them to do, 5% on defence? And that he's done the latter. So in that sense, it went relatively well for European NATO members.
Well, yes, it shows that the charm offensive does seem to have actually worked in a way, doesn't it? And it's similar to what we saw with Keir Starmer, that it's sort of there was some criticism. He seemed a bit sort of unduly grovelling, all of this sort of a attempt to kind of soft-soap the president with these kind of invitations to come and have a state visit and so on. And similarly, we saw Mark Rutte's message that, you know, just seemed very, very piling on the kind of charm to Donald Trump. stunt, but actually it does seem to have worked, that he does need a bit of flattery to get him on board. But at the same time, his push has been to try and get NATO members to take defence more seriously, to put more money in, and that seemed to have worked too. So I guess, you know, the diplomacy is the art of everyone feeling that they've got a win here, and I think that's what they've managed to achieve at this conference. But the key question, sort of, that you know, Deb's sort of linked through with the kind of the more light-hearted sort of focus on Daddy is kind of, well, if he's the father figure, he's trying to get the children to stand on their own 2 feet. Is that something that is going to happen further down the line? And that isn't something that really was answered. No,
certainly not. But great stuff, Amanda. As always, great stuff by Deb in the Hague yesterday over the last couple of days. We'll talk about all of that with the government in 5 minutes. Well, this week, the Health Secretary announced a national investigation into maternity services in England. There are calls for Oxford University hospitals to be included in that inquiry. Nearly 500 women have raised concerns about their care, telling Sky News they felt uncared for and ignored. Our health correspondent Laura Bundock has this report.
The birth of Morgan's second baby still haunts her. He was born by caesarean and rushed to special care.
There were midwives who believed that I was just too lazy to have a natural birth and said that I had made my son poorly by being lazy.
These careless comments from a midwife made Morgan feel like a failure.
Even though it was recommended by doctors that I had a caesarean, it was medically necessary, I felt like I should have done more to help him. Sorry.
And how are you now?
It still hurts to think back on it.
Morgan's among the 500 families calling for an inquiry into maternity care at Oxford University hospitals. Their testimonies speak of traumatic births and unsympathetic staff. I felt uncared for and ignored. I felt I was going to die. Annika had 3 miscarriages before giving birth to her son. She was refused a caesarean, contrary to national guidelines, and offered no pain relief despite repeated requests.
I'd said so many times that I was anxious, but it just never got taken seriously. It just kept getting brushed off, and they were just ignoring me. I was saying I was in pain. They were like, oh yeah, we'll get you something. Never did. It's clearly they never intended to.
Maternity care at Oxford University hospitals requires improvement, according to the latest inspection. It's not alone. Across England, 65%, almost 2/3 of acute hospital maternity services are judged either inadequate or requires improvement for safety. Not one rated outstanding. There have been 3 independent investigations into maternity failings, with a 4th in Nottingham ongoing. Between them, they've made 125 recommendations. But services are still in crisis. The Health Secretary, Wes Streetings, ordered a system-wide review. 10 poorly performing trusts will be scrutinised. The trust says women are offered caesareans, and it's arranging to meet campaigners. The chief nurse told Sky News, "We regret any instance where we fail to provide the service that women and their families should expect. When this happens, we make every effort to review individual cases, to understand what went wrong and how we can improve. We are never complacent and welcome all feedback, whether positive or negative, as we learn from both." But those living with the trauma of their births want more. Their campaign won't stop until real change comes. Laura Bundock, Sky News, Oxford.
Right, time to talk to the government. Lots to discuss. Delighted to say that we're joined by the Trade Policy Minister, Douglas Alexander. Very good morning to you, Minister.
Good morning.
Thanks for joining us. I want to start on the welfare bill,
Sure.
A kind of big topic that's been brewing over the last week or so in particular. What's the latest government position? Is this something where discussions are ongoing or concessions are about to be made?
Well, discussions are certainly ongoing. You would expect that ahead of the second reading that's due to take place next Tuesday. 120 of our colleagues in the parliamentary party have signed that reasoned amendment. And so in that sense, we've read very carefully what that reasoned amendment says. The first thing that strikes you when you read the amendment is the degree of commonality on the principles. Everyone agrees welfare needs reform and that the system was broken. Everyone recognises you're trying to take people off benefit and into work because that's better for them and also better for our fiscal position. And everyone recognises that we need to protect the most vulnerable. Where there is, honestly, some disagreement at the moment is on the issue of how do you give implementation to those principles. Now, normally at a second reading, you're only voting on the principles of legislation, and then in the report stage and the committee stage, you deal with that implementation. The effect of what's happened with this reasoned amendment being tabled is that that's brought forward the discussion of how to give implementation to those principles. So given the high level of agreement on the principles, the discussions over the coming days will really be about the implementation of those principles.
Do you have enough time to do that, or is it worth delaying the bill a little bit?
I think we've got time. There'll be discussions that will be happening. There's discussions that have started happening, and I expect that those conversations will continue.
So is what's tabled in the amendment going to be accepted by the government, or is this something of trying to table your own amendment to the bill? What's going to be the process?
Well, certainly the principles that are set out in the reasoned amendment, as I say, there's a high degree of commonality about with the government, so we can accept those principles because we share them. Equally, it's right to recognise these issues touch very deeply the Labour Party's sense of itself and the rights and responsibilities of members of Parliament. What I see is everyone trying to do their job well. Ministers trying to be open with Parliament as to the ambitions that we have. Members of Parliament being clear as to their responsibility to scrutinise this legislation and get it right. And that's the character of the conversation that's taking place between ministers and members of Parliament in the hours and days ahead.
I've no doubt everyone's trying to do their job well, but clearly someone's dropped the ball here to lead to a position where 120 of your own MPs, including all the committee chairs within, or 11 of the committee chairs. Is there pressure on Morgan McSweeney?
Listen, I'm much less interested in the gossip about SW1 than whether this legislation works on the streets, in the towns, in the communities right across the country. And my honest judgment, many of my friends have signed that amendment, friends and colleagues of long standing in the House of Commons, is that their primary motivation is to do well by their constituents, to get this legislation right. And there are some honest disagreements there as to whether this legislation yet is what they're looking for and whether there's ways that it can be improved. But I think it's to diminish the commitment of those Labour MPs to their constituents and, frankly, to seeing a difficult and challenging issue like welfare reform be got right by the government, to diminish it to some of the gossip and headlines that are inevitably around an issue like this. I accept that. But I think their motivations actually are about the legislation, the policy, and getting the policy right.
Well, with all due respect, it might not interest you, but it interests me. And, what I'm hearing there is you didn't suggest there's not that there's pressure growing on Morgan McSweeney, which I think is striking.
Well, you're entitled to your opinion, I'm entitled to mine. The fact is, the Prime Minister... Just let me finish the point. The Prime Minister is in charge of Downing Street. You wouldn't reasonably expect me to be passing judgment on who's working in the Sky News team this morning. It's for the Prime Minister to make his judgments. The fact is, that team delivered us an historic victory only last July against expectations. What Keir Starmer did when he became leader of the Labour Party was what, over 18 years, Neil Kinnock, John Smith and Tony Blair managed. He managed it in 4 years against all expectations with the team in Downing Street. So I have deep respect for what was achieved. I also know that the task of government is hard. There are always going to be people with strong opinions on all sides of an issue like welfare reform. So I think what's much less interesting than how we got here or who's involved is whether we get the policy right. And that's the task that we're focused on in the coming days.
Well, listen, I totally accept all of that, but, implicit in my question, or brings me to the next one, is if somebody doesn't take the blame for what has been an error in managing your own party to lead to this level of rebellion, then it's on the Prime Minister for not managing internal party politics.
Honestly,
we all can have disagreements, but you could have had these discussions with your colleagues weeks or months ago, so it didn't lead to a point where 120 of your MPs have publicly said, we do not agree with our government on this central policy.
So I hope that this is an instance where maybe experience lends perspective. I was part of Tony Blair's government and Gordon Brown's government. I will remember what was a large rebellion very early after the 1997 landslide over the issue of lone parent benefits. What happened was a significant rebellion. There were screaming headlines. People were saying lessons must be learned. And what followed that rebellion was not just the largest fall in child poverty that we'd seen in generations, the largest fall in pensioner poverty, but a Labour government that had the capacity to come together and deliver for the people of the United Kingdom. I have every confidence that in time there will be a sense of proportionality and scale that's perhaps missing in some of the newspaper headlines this morning, because actually this is Parliament doing its job, it's the government doing its job for the people, and we're going to move forward together.
Well, with all due respect, you're implicitly suggesting that I'm inexperienced, and I'm afraid anyone can look at this.
I'm not saying that at all. I'm just offering the perspective of having gone through a previous rebellion where people said this was, if you like, of seismic consequence for the future of the Prime Minister, that Tony Blair had misjudged the issue. And the reality was that Tony Blair went on to be an extraordinarily successful Prime Minister in the course of that Parliament and in the subsequent years. So I think sometimes that historical perspective is useful.
120 MPs, including 11 committee chairs, is significant whichever way you try and frame this. And let's see what the Prime Minister meets when he comes home from NATO. And just to follow up on this, I don't think Tony Blair ever faced, a year into his government, what you face today with a new YouGov MRP poll that suggests your seats in Parliament, if an election was held today, would halve to 178. Did Tony Blair face that? I'm a bit inexperienced. Can you clarify for me?
He didn't face the multi-party politics that is a feature of politics more than 20 years after his time in office. But did we face challenging headlines and difficult political issues? 100%. The fact is, what we read in that MRP poll is a snapshot of public opinion less than a year, just under a year, into a Labour government that has a mandate for 5 years. So should we take it seriously? Yes, we absolutely should. As a snapshot of opinion today, but not necessarily a good guide to where we will be at the time of the general election. The greatest antidote to reform is an effective Labour government. We have time. We have the capacity to govern well over the coming 4 years. And when I read those headlines, what it teaches me is that there is undoubtedly a hunger for change in the country. That's what got us elected in July. It's why we feel the pressure of public opinion. But it's why we've already delivered, for example, lower waiting lists for the first time since 2008. It's why we've delivered a rise in the national minimum wage. It's why we are busting our tails to deliver trade deals, growth and jobs for people in the United Kingdom. So we take that as an instruction to make sure that we move further and faster in relation to the change that we fully accept people want to see.
Convenient to use the historic example of the Tony Blair government when it suits you, but versus when it doesn't, to make your argument. I think the final question, I really want to get onto your trade stuff on this. Unequivocally, the government is saying the vote will go ahead on Tuesday?
Deputy Prime Minister made that clear yesterday.
OK, very interesting. So that's definitely going ahead then?
Well, as I say, the Deputy Prime Minister at the dispatch box in the House of Commons said the vote would happen.
Let's talk about what you are here to announce on the trade policy, which I find really interesting. And this is to try and follow up what's already been agreed for some goods trade on services as well. Is that the central point?
So we've done 3 trade deals in the last couple of months. We've done the deal with the United States, the deal with the European Union and the deal with India. What we set out today is a broader strategic framework that says, what are our ambitions going forward? You're right to recognise there's a big feature on services because we're an 81% services-based economy and there's a global services boom happening at the moment, so that's a big opportunity for British workers and for British jobs. What we've heard from the business community is many of the barriers they want to be taken down are not actually at the border, tariffs, but beyond the border. So we've got a whole series of measures in this strategy setting out how we're going to do that. Essentially quicker, sharper, more agile deals. At the same time, we're in a world where barriers are going up rather than coming down. It's more protectionist, it's more isolationist than even a few years ago. So we're also looking at whether we have the right trade defences to protect British business and British jobs from anti-competitive behaviour. And we've got new measures that we're setting out today in the strategy. And finally, of course, we're looking to provide better support for British business. We lost a whole number of businesses from the exporting business at the time of Brexit. We're determined to get them back into selling their goods and services to the world.
What I'm unclear on with this strategy is whether it leads domestically to more or less regulation. Is this a case of saying we know overseas our companies face regulation and we want to work to get that removed by foreign competitors? Or is it the other way around, which is to say we need to help you be competitive on the world stage. And if China's got lower regulation, we need to match it.
So we've listened to business who have told us that there are lots of barriers internationally that inhibit British business exporting more. So a very practical example, if you're selling pharmaceuticals from the UK, we've got world-class pharmaceutical companies. There are regulatory barriers in Egypt that make it difficult for you to sell pharmaceuticals into Egypt. So we will be working with regulators and with policymakers in Egypt and countries like that to make sure that where there are barriers that can be torn down to secure new markets and new opportunities for British business, we're grasping them for those companies.
Just on the topic of pharmaceuticals, since you mentioned it, where are we on the US pharmaceutical deal?
So they've still got their 232 investigation, they technically call it, underway. We're already in dialogue with the Americans. We've seen progress in relation to autos, we've seen progress in relation to aeronautics, but we're working hard in relation to steel. We're talking in relation to pharmaceuticals, but it's like any negotiation, relying on the Americans as well as the UK. But we're already the only government in the world to have done a deal with the Trump administration. We've delivered that, as you saw from the Prime Minister in Alberta already, but there's more work to do.
Minister, thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Thank
Good to see you, Douglas Alexander. Let's have a look at the weather.
Breathtaking views with clear skies ahead. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
It'll be unsettled into next week, especially in the north and the west, and will turn very warm again. It's mostly warm and humid now, with outbreaks of rain over northern and western Britain and showers for eastern England, but Ireland and Northern Ireland are mostly fine. Britain will see increasingly showery rain clearing across the east this morning, with more scattered showers following, but western parts will turn mainly dry and sunny. Ireland and Northern Ireland, meanwhile, will see a few showers developing. It'll be a bit cooler and fresher. Eastern Britain will see showers clearing during the first part of the afternoon, leaving England, Wales and southern Scotland dry and sunny.
Breathtaking views with clear skies ahead. Qatar Airways sponsors the weather.
So to come here on The Breakfast Show, we'll be talking to Sam Coates next about what we just heard from Douglas Alexander, but also that latest poll.
Our app gives you the very best of Sky News wherever you are. Breaking news, videos and analysis.
Evidence of the crisis.
Podcasts, watching us live.
Live here from Washington.
Wherever you get your podcast.
All in one place. And all at just the touch of a screen. The Sky News app. Get the full story first.
I'm Stephen Murphy and I'm Sky's Ireland correspondent based here in Dublin. The waters of Ireland and Britain should be home to great white sharks. If there are great white sharks in this area, there's no reason they wouldn't come here to feed. It's basically a buffet on a beach. This could be not only a record-breaking storm, but potentially the most dangerous storm ever to hit Ireland.
Welcome back to The Breakfast Show. Well, coming up in a moment, Amanda and I will be speaking to Sam Coates. We'll all be having a group discussion about that brewing Labour revolt over benefit cuts. But first, let's just remind you of our top stories this morning. The medicines regulators reported hundreds of cases of pancreatic problems linked to weight loss jabs. 10 deaths have been recorded. There's no evidence Wegovy, Mounjaro and Ozempic, taken by more than 1 million people in the UK, were directly responsible. Sir Keir Starmer's top team is asking Labour MPs to stop supporting a move which could derail changes to the benefit system in England and Wales. Trade Minister Douglas Alexander told this programme a few minutes ago the vote would definitely go ahead on Tuesday and discussions would continue right up until then. There are calls for Oxford University hospitals to be included in an inquiry into NHS maternity services in England. Nearly 500 women have come forward raising concerns about their care, telling Sky News they felt uncared for and ignored. The CIA has supported Donald Trump's assessment that US airstrikes severely damaged an underground Iranian nuclear facility. It follows leaked reports from the Pentagon suggesting the raid only caused minor damage. Mr. Trump says more talks with Iran will take place next week. As you see, Amanda's here on set, and we're also now joined by our deputy political editor, Sam Coates. Sam, sometimes when you join us from home, I'm a little disappointed that you didn't make it into studio, but this time it's the other way round because where are you?
I am in Glastonbury town, just 5 miles away from the festival, which is where I'll head after this.
Well, therefore, I'm particularly delighted that you found the time to join us. And I know one of the reasons, the many reasons, is because of this extraordinary poll, the MRP YouGov poll, that we'll get to in a moment, that you debuted, first of all, on your podcast early this morning. But first, just got to get your take on that interview we just did with Douglas Alexander and I guess the implications for this brewing revolt over the welfare bill.
When listening to ministers and when listening to somebody as skilled as Douglas Alexander in particular, you have to pick through the meaning really carefully. And basically what this government's doing, I took away from that interview, is it's reserving its options in quite a lot of different ways. This government is still trying to persuade rebels to back down. Douglas Alexander was making an argument that the whole of the Labour Party agrees on the principles of the bill. In other words, everybody pretty much agrees that the welfare budget needs to be cut, and it's just a question of how you do it. And therefore, by implication, his argument is, you can all back us on Tuesday, you can all vote for this. But it's not clear that that's the case, because, you know, we've got nudging 130 Labour MPs saying, no, we're signing up to an amendment that would kill the bill. So I think there's a bit of wishful thinking there from Douglas Alexander. So maybe they can talk people around, but maybe they do just have to pull it from Tuesday. I was fascinated by the way that Douglas Alexander answered your question at the end about whether or not the bill would definitely go to a vote on Tuesday. He said, well, Angela Rayner said so. It's not quite a yes, is it? He's blaming somebody else. And he can blame Angela Rayner if that turns out not to be true.
Well, yeah, I'm not sure we'd let him off the blame for that because he's the one that gave that answer. What, Sam, was your take on that historical comparison? The idea that all governments face big rebellions and revolts and once you get past them, they're meaningless. Is that fair or not?
Look, I think that if you speak to Harriet Harman, who ended up losing her job over what happened in the early Blair years when there was an attempt to cut welfare payments, I don't think it was a blip. It is true to say that the Labour Party then went on to win a landslide majority in the 2001 election, despite that row. The problem, where the comparison totally falls down, is that at the point of the welfare row, Tony Blair's government was still popular. Whereas, as we will come on to in just a second, Keir Starmer's government and Keir Starmer's personal ratings have absolutely tanked on an unprecedented scale. Keir Starmer at the moment is polling somewhere in the region of, he gets the same approval ratings according to YouGov as Benjamin Netanyahu amongst the UK population. So he is not a popular prime minister and this is not a popular government. And so, yes, it is possible for a rebellion to happen and there to be a revolt and governments to come back. But the whole political architecture of where they were when that happened for New Labour and for Tony Blair was totally different.
Yeah. I also thought, Amanda, it was interesting he didn't want to go into anything on Morgan McSweeney, Amanda, in terms of backing him or criticising him or anything, which, again, maybe we take too much from these things, but it was a lack of a vote of confidence in him that some people might take away from.
Well, yes, it's quite striking, really. So that Morgan McSweeney, for the uninitiated, is Sir Keir Starmer's chief of staff, and he's widely seen as a bit of a guru in the Labour Party, as the kind of archetype of their huge landslide win at the last election. But clearly, there is a real blame game going on within the party as to how it got to this point that you have virtually a third of the party's MPs out of that massive majority, so completely out of step with the party leadership. And as much as Douglas Alexander is arguing this is about implementation, not the principles, I mean, the implementation here is that they're saying they want to kill the bill altogether, is what they're saying. They're not just saying we want to tweak it, they're saying we have such fundamental issues with what we want to change that we don't think it should go ahead in its current form. And just remember that Sue Gray was initially Sir Keir Starmer's right-hand man, and then she and Morgan McSweeney had a real power struggle, it seems, within Downing Street. She was ousted, and he's sort of been in charge since then, really, in terms of the strategy of all of this. And I think the suggestion is that he really believes that, although this is very unpopular with the Labour Party, it's something that plays much more broadly with members of the public, particularly Labour, obviously very concerned, given what we've seen in the polling, about the threat of reform.
What's your take on McSweeney in all of this, Sam?
So I think there is a lot of criticism that he didn't come to this party and didn't realise the scale of the rebellion until quite late. And there's also been some heat because of allegations, I don't know whether they're true or not, that he was behind blaming the whips for not flagging it when they, I think, feel that they did. But there's a bigger thing going on, Wilf, which is I think there is a power struggle going on in number 10. And we talk about this on the podcast this morning. Morgan McSweeney, a few months ago, as Chief of Staff to the Prime Minister after the resignation of Sue Gray, was in charge of all that he surveyed. But that isn't true anymore. There is a new figure, a new big figure in number 10 called Liz Lloyd. She's sort of the political chief of policy. And she's been flexing her muscles. She's got a more hard line than Morgan. Morgan McSweeney, as far as I understand it, is sounding conciliatory in his conversations with rebels and with others in Downing Street, whereas Liz Lloyd is not, and she comes from a sort of more resolute background. And Liz Lloyd is a big figure. And in this discussion that the Times kicked off this morning, Patrick Maguire, their chief political commentator, about whether or not Morgan McSweeney could be sidelined. The thing is, Wilf, there is another big beast who could sort of take and eclipse Morgan and take that role all of a sudden, and that is Liz Lloyd. And they do seem to be in slightly different places on that. And that is, you know, as we learn a lot about this government through this row, that is a big and significant change.
Sam, snapshot for us. You mentioned already the position, the popularity of this government at the moment, and what jumped out for you on this new poll that you had, you broke the news of on your podcast this morning.
So the YouGov MRP, that's a polling projection on every seat in Great Britain. I mean, it just redraws the political landscape. So Reform UK come out as the biggest party. They've got 6 seats at the moment. Under this polling projection, it would go up to 271. Labour, well, as you were saying to Douglas Alexander, their seats halve to 178. But the thing that really, really kind of, you know, stands out is that the Conservative Party, you know, one of the most effective electoral machines in this country, their seat tally is slashed to just 46 seats. That's basically a party in the final throes of death. They drop behind the Liberal Democrats, who go up and look like a party basically on the verge of extinction under this polling projection. In order to stop Reform UK putting Nigel Farage in number 10, you'd sort of have to have a coalition between the Liberal Democrats, the Tories and Labour, and possibly the SNP. So it is a very, very tricky moment if you're one of the establishment parties right now.
Amanda, bring us up to speed with the latest we're thinking on the welfare stuff. I guess Sky News able to confirm some things that we essentially already learned from Douglas Alexander, but coming from a source in Number 10.
Yes, so Number 10 confirming that discussions are ongoing, which is something, of course, that you would expect them to want to do with this kind of situation brewing. But they say they're talking to colleagues about the bill, the changes it will bring. They want to start delivering it together. I mean, more broadly, reiterating their argument that has been the case all along, that they're saying the welfare system is broken, they need to do this to fix it, it's fair and responsible to do so, and insisting, as Douglas Alexander did, that there is broad consensus in the party about this. But another thing I think is quite interesting about that sort of argument that he was making is, yes, there might be an agreement across the Labour Party that there should be more done to encourage people who've been off work with long-term sickness or disability back into work. There should be more support out there for them. But the fact is the government is also cutting personal independence payments, which have nothing to do with work. They're about helping people with the additional costs of living with a long-term sickness or a disability. And that's the big thing that's caused this rebellion, which is quite a separate issue in a way from the government's support. And the Rebels would really like to see, yes, more support brought forward about getting people back into work. But fundamentally, there is a difference of opinion about whether it's appropriate to kind of restrict the amount of support we're giving people just to live with their illness or disability. 800,000 people losing that. And that really is quite a fundamental issue here about whether or not, as a country, we want to be supporting as many people in that way.
Sam, I think you want to weigh in on that.
I just want to say I got that statement from Number 10, from the Number 10 source, at midnight 26. And nothing screams government's not going quite right to the statement that you get at 26 minutes past midnight.
No, absolutely. I have two quick final questions. One is important, one is a bit more light-hearted, based on where you are, Sam. But the first one comes down to this. Will they actually go ahead with the vote, in your assessment? And if they were to be unsuccessful, going back to these comparisons to the Blair government, that would be a huge, huge moment, would it not?
In order to get this vote through, the government needs to commit, and probably commit in writing and at the dispatch box, to massive, massive concessions that will cost Rachel Reeves billions of pounds. And I really struggle with the idea that that will be negotiated before Tuesday, right? The government was utterly hardline that they were going ahead yesterday morning. You know, maybe they can get the negotiations with the Rebels over the line in this tiny time period. But the scale of the black hole that's going to be blown open in Rachel Reeves' finances means that I think she'll take a few more days before she signs up to those concessions. Maybe I'm wrong. The easier path is to delay Tuesday's vote, which is why I think, yes, we'll hold Douglas Alexander to account, but I still think he was very cute in the way that he referred to other ministers saying it was going to go ahead rather than giving his own macking.
Sam, final question. Glastonbury, obviously, next couple of days. I was going to ask who you're most looking forward to seeing, which I guess is my question, but not so much on stage. In terms of attendance, this has become quite the Sky News trip to Glastonbury, isn't it?
Colleagues enjoy themselves in a myriad of ways, Wilf, and you wouldn't want me asking how you enjoy yourself at the weekend. What I would say is that actually it's a massive cultural event. And in fairness to me, I've been covering it since about 2004. And one of the things that really strikes you as a political journalist is that very often you get to learn something about the sort of mood of the nation, or it just happens to occur at a point where massive UK events are taking place. So there was a sort of very memorable one in 2016 after the Brexit vote. I think it's fair to say a lot of Glastonbury voters, festival goers, are sort of more Remain-minded. Jeremy Corbyn turned up in 2017 almost as if he'd won the general election that a couple of weeks before he'd actually lost. Those chants of "Oh, Jeremy Corbyn" from thousands of people, sort of giving him succor. Through COVID, it was a sort of emblem of Britain shutting up shop. Right now, I was wandering the festival site yesterday. It's interesting, the politics is kind of eco-left, but the key thing that struck me is that Keir Starmer is no friend of this festival. He's one of the people that's listed as being a sort of display led by donkeys and the festival, who should be put in a rocket and sent to the moon alongside Elon Musk, Donald Trump and Mark Zuckerberg and Nick Clegg. The festival artwork all suggests that they should be exiled to another planet. Keir Starmer is not a popular figure on the fringes of Glastonbury.
Well, you've managed, Sam, to turn that into not just a sort of manufactured justification, but rather a compelling one. But by the way, that wasn't even in my question. I know Mari's there. We wish you all a fantastic weekend. I know. I was about to say I definitely didn't get the invite, but nor do I mind, because multiple days in a row in either the blazing sun or the rain.
But you're not in a tent, Sam. When are you camping?
I am camping, but you are not allowed to do broadcasting from the festival site because it's a sort of BBC monopoly. So I've had to hop to a friend's house in Glastonbury
town. I think we just showed a picture that you did do broadcasting from the festival site back in your younger years.
In 2017, yeah, it's the second time you've put up that photograph, Wilf, and I will only reiterate this one thing. When I get hold of a photo of you at leisure, I too will put it on our television screens.
I don't think Wilf's hair is ever going to look as good as
that,
though.
I'm fine with that, within reason. And I doubt that was the most damning photograph taken of you of that weekend back in 2017. So let's just keep that in perspective in the weeks and months ahead. Sam, great stuff.
Social media
we appreciate it, and great context as always, regardless of location. Have fun. Likewise to everyone at Glastonbury this weekend. Right, still to come here on The Breakfast Show. We're going to be talking about the new director of the James Bond film franchise.
I'm Mark Stone, and I'm Sky's correspondent based here in Washington, D.C.
We'd been warned that we would meet people in the lowest moment of their lives.
Their story is one of fundamental American failure. Well, a slow drive for the president as he approaches his golf club, but I have to say there are more media here than there are supporters.
We love Trump!
I've witnessed the remarkable passion for politics here, but the anger too. This is just the audience that Joe Biden wanted.
Is this the moment to reform gun laws?
You know, it's easy to go to politics.
But it's important. It's at the heart of the issue.
For all the talk of a toned-down, humbled Trump, yes, maybe there was just a little less rhetoric, a little less divisiveness, but in the end it was the same rhythm, the same speech, the same man.
All them people that died in Russia and Ukraine, they'd still be alive today if Donald Trump was the president.
If it was my wish, have a businessman that's strong like Trump, but maybe just doesn't say as much, you know?
We are under Israeli military restrictions in terms of some of the things that we can film, but it's important to be in there.
What we've been allowed to see over here is a humanitarian corridor. Free wherever you get your news.
A young American medical student is making remarkable things happen.
I've seen a lot of difficult things, and honestly, it breaks my heart. These children don't deserve that.
I don't think there's a single Arab I know who isn't seriously disturbed by what's going on.
And so they gathered for this wonder of nature.
I'm very excited right now.
This is an extraordinary moment beyond anything I could have expected. Sky News, get the full story first.
What might happen if Russia attacked the UK?
This is clearly an enormous show of force.
It is definitely out of the ordinary.
We ran a war game with former ministers back in the hot seat.
Ben Wallace.
Amber Rudd.
Jack Straw.
It's the kind of war game that's genuinely tested inside government.
The Russians are signalling that there may be an attack.
Russia knows our weaknesses, but do you? I'm Deborah Haynes. From Sky News and Tortoise, this is The War Game. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
I'm Stephen Murphy, and I'm Sky's Ireland correspondent based here in Dublin.
The waters of Ireland and Britain should be home to great white sharks. If there are great white sharks in this area, there's no reason they wouldn't come here to feed. It's basically a buffet on a beach.
This could be not only a record-breaking storm, but potentially the most dangerous storm ever to hit Ireland.
Welcome back. Returning to one of our top stories, in a new study will look into the side effects of weight loss jabs after 10 people have died and hundreds of others reported problems with their pancreas. We're joined now by GP Dr. Sonia Adesara and the Chief Safety Officer of the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulator, Alison Cave. Very good morning to you both. Thanks for joining us. Alison, first and foremost, What has or hasn't yet been discovered as it relates to these weight loss drugs?
Good morning, and many thanks for having me. So, first of all, I would like just to take a moment to emphasize that these medicines have been assessed to be safe and effective when used for their license indication. And that means if patients been properly prescribed one of these medicines by a healthcare professional, following a consultant for a medical condition. And in those scenarios, you know, the benefits will outweigh the risk of taking them. But like all medicines, GLP medicines, and these are medicines that people may be taking for either type 2 diabetes, for the management of that condition, or for weight loss, can cause side effects. And the most common side effects we're seeing are gastrointestinal effects, such as nausea, vomiting, and diarrhea. And these are usually mild to moderate and of short duration, but they can sometimes be more serious and lead to dehydration, which might result in hospitalization. But one side effect which is, although uncommon, may be more serious, is something called acute pancreatitis, and that's an inflammation of your pancreas. And this may be serious. And it's useful for me, if I might just take a minute to explain to people what the main symptom of this may be, which is a severe pain in the stomach, which then may radiate to the back and doesn't go away. And if anyone who experiences should seek immediate medical help. So just obviously, we're seeing more of these reactions as the use increases, and the use increases quite substantially. And that's one of the reasons why we're launched this new initiative, which I can explain to you if you'd like to move on to that now.
Well, and just before we come to that, the timing's very interesting to us all, because obviously we covered the story earlier in the week that these drugs are available on the NHS for the first time just earlier this week. So these drugs have been around for a while. They've obviously gone through extensive testing both here and in the US. Have you been surprised by this latest data? I mean, it's odd timing to launch this new review that you're doing the very same week that it's become available on the NHS. Did you miss something, or was this something you were always aware of and just sort of circling back on?
No, this particular reaction was reported in clinical trials, so we knew about it. We're seeing an increase in the numbers because of the increase in the exposure, and we're monitoring this very carefully. But I think it's very important to understand, while serious, these reports still remain low in the context of the overall usage. But the reason we're launching this now is because of the increased exposure, and because we're interested to know whether there may be a genetic factor which may be underlying an increase in susceptibility of some individuals to this particular reaction. And if we can understand that and identify that, then we can prevent those reactions happening at all.
Dr. Adesara, what is your take in terms of the numbers of people that have been wanting this drug, and whether or not you, as someone that might prescribe it or not, are fully aware of all of these details?
Yeah, I'd say the numbers of people wanting this drug are huge. I have many patients requesting it. And actually, I think what's more worrying for me is that I have many, many, many patients who are getting these drugs online, from online pharmacies, sometimes from the black market, and they're telling me that they're taking these medicines. And I actually have found that a lot of these patients, not all of them are having proper checks and health checks. Some of them are not actually obese or that overweight, and many young people are being started on these medications without proper checks. So I'm finding that really concerning. And yes, we are aware of the side effects of these medicines. Just like all medicines have side effects, the gastrointestinal side effects are very, very common. We are aware of the risk of pancreatitis, which is rare but serious and can be potentially life-threatening. But I also have other concerns as well. There is a dependency issue with these medications. So these medications work whilst you're taking them, and I know that they have been helpful for people to help them lose weight. But we know that they work once you stop taking them. The studies show that for most people, they end up putting the weight back on fairly quickly. So I guess what I feel that we should be thinking about, and I know how I know how difficult it is to lose weight because I have so many patients struggling with that. But we do need to be thinking about what else we can be doing within the NHS to help people lose weight in a sustainable, healthy way. So getting people to have more nutritious diets, getting people more active, developing, I wish we could be able to support people to develop sort of more sustainable, lifelong, healthy habits. So my patients are healthier and fitter in the long run. Rather than the situation that we have at the moment where so many people are turning to these medicines because they're really struggling to lose weight.
Alison, so what is in this new investigation and what's the timeline of it?
Okay, so if I might just take a minute, though, to pick up on that point, and then I'll move to that. We would remind patients that these medicines should not be bought from unregulated sellers, such as beauty salons or via social media, or taken without a prior consultation with a healthcare professional. That's really important because not only does it expose to people who are generally purchasing these because they want to lose weight to serious health risks, it's also against the law to sell these medicines in this way. And the only way to guarantee receiving a genuine product is to obtain it through a legitimate pharmacy. But the study that we're doing is going to use the pioneering yellow card biobank, and that's named after our spontaneous adverse reporting scheme called the Yellow Card Scheme. And it's been launched by us at the Medicines and Healthcare Product Regulatory Agency with Genomics England to start investigating whether the risk of this acute pancreatitis, the inflammation in your pancreas, which again I would emphasize is an uncommon reaction from GLP-1 injections, may be influenced by individuals' genes. And we hope that information from this study will help us to better predict those at risk of adverse events. And that will enable patients across the UK to receive this medicine more safely based on their genetic makeup. And that's really exciting for me because in the future, it may allow us to prevent these reactions from happening at all.
Really, really fascinating stuff. Thank you both very much. Dr. Adesara and Alison Cave, a really interesting discussion. Well, we have just enough time in a passing way to mention that the new director of the James Bond franchise has been announced, Denis Villeneuve. Guys, quick poll, we'll have a long discussion next hour. Please, I'm pleased because the Dune movies, which he did, were epic.
Absolutely incredible.
I never watched those.
Oh, so
I actually
good.
looked through all of his films today and I haven't watched any of them. I'm really sorry.
Well, anyway,
Epic,
the other
epic
next big
director.
question is who he will cast as the Bond role himself. We'll discuss that next hour, as well as all of the day's top stories. We're rolling.
Welcome to the world.
Our new podcast. It's starting now. It's very exciting. Every week, we'll be reporting from the world's trouble spots.
We get to hold those in positions of power accountable, and we get to ask the questions that the audience, the listeners, want to know about.
And that's why it is so important that people tune in, come along for the road, come along for the journey. It'll be fun.
Good morning to you. It's 8 o'clock on today's show. New fears over weight loss jabs. 10 people have died after reporting severe side effects.
Plus, growing reports that the government is preparing to back down on welfare reform in the face of a major Labour rebellion.
It's Thursday, the 26th of June. Your headlines. A probe is launched into why some users of weight loss drugs are suffering problems with their pancreas. The government refuses to be drawn on whether concessions will be made to the welfare bill as rebellion within the party grows, but insists the vote will go ahead next week.
These issues touch very deeply the Labour Party's sense of itself and the rights and responsibilities of members of Parliament.
Nearly 500 women raised concerns about maternity care they received at the Oxford University Hospitals Trust. And Canadian Denis Villeneuve is announced as the director of the next James Bond film. Very good morning to you. 10 people have died after reporting a severe side effect from weight loss injections. Doctors started offering the jabs on the NHS this week, but some patients have reported pancreas problems. We're going to talk about this with Sadia in just a moment. But first, we're going to get to the medical regulator because they've launched an investigation to try and understand the cause of the adverse reactions. Alison Cave joined us moments ago.
One side effect which is, although uncommon, may be more serious, is something called acute pancreatitis, and that's an inflammation of your pancreas. And this may be serious, and it's useful for me if I might just take a minute to explain to people what the main symptom of this may be, which is a severe pain in the stomach, which then may radiate to the back and doesn't go away. And if anyone who experiences should seek immediate medical help.
Sadia's here to explain a bit more about the story, but also reflect on the interview we did, which I have to say I thought was pretty striking. I didn't know if there would be a very clear answer as to why the timing is as it is. This got rolled out on the NHS this week, and they're announcing this 4 days later.
Yeah, I think there'll be lots of questions about that. Why wasn't this announced earlier? As you say, the NHS just started prescribing this on Monday, where they announced a 3-year programme aimed at tackling obesity, which meant that 220,000 patients will start being offered this job. It's a real topic of conversation right now because weight loss jabs are promoted by a lot of people as something that's good because it makes people look good, makes them feel good, but also there are lots of concerns around its safety. And this particular concern today that has been raised is around the impact it has on some people's pancreas, with hundreds of people reporting problems. Now, let's just make it really clear. There are two things I have to make really clear. One is that the problems didn't start since Monday. These are the problems that have been collected in data that has been collected since the drugs were first licensed. In the case of Mounjaro, that is November 2023. And the other things to say is that the problems aren't necessarily caused by the jabs, but they are being linked to the jabs, which means that people who have presented have themselves suspected that the jabs are the cause of their issues. But there have been some fatalities, and that is what the MHRA is really concerned about. So do you want me to tell you what they're going to do?
Yeah.
It's called a yellow card study. So the idea is if you are taking these jabs and you come into hospital, you're admitted, you should report these things, and they can do like a study about your genetics and see if that is the cause behind it. There has been some reaction to all of this from the manufacturers who say that patient safety is a top priority for them, and they said that anyone taking the drugs should only do so under strict medical advice. The Mounjaro patient information leaflet does, though, however, warn that an inflamed pancreas is an uncommon side effect which may affect up to 1 in 100 people.
Yeah, that was interesting to hear Dr. Adesara as well reflect on the point that these drugs, when properly given by a doctor, will consider all of these possibilities in a way that perhaps if people are just buying the drugs directly themselves doesn't get considered. Sadia, great stuff. Thanks so much. Now, there's growing reports that the Prime Minister is preparing to back down on cuts to disability benefits in the face of a major Labour rebellion. The Government Minister, Douglas Alexander, joining us last hour, had this to say.
Well, discussions are certainly ongoing. You would expect that ahead of the second reading that's due to take place next Tuesday. 120 of our colleagues in the parliamentary party have signed that reasoned amendment. And so in that sense, we've read very carefully what that reasoned amendment says. The first thing that strikes you when you read the amendment is the degree of commonality on the principles. Everyone agrees welfare needs reform and that the system was broken. Everyone recognises you're trying to take people off benefit and into work because that's better for them and also better for our fiscal position. And everyone recognises that we need to protect the most vulnerable. Where there is, honestly, some disagreement at the moment is on the issue of how do you give implementation to those principles. Now, normally at a second reading, you're only voting on the principles of legislation, and then in the report stage and the committee stage, you deal with that implementation. The effect of what's happened with this reasoned amendment being tabled is that that's brought forward the discussion of how to give implementation to those principles. So given the high level of agreement on the principles, the discussions over the coming days will really be about the implementation of those principles.
Do you have enough time to do that, or is it worth delaying the bill a little bit?
I think we've got time. There'll be discussions that will be happening. There's discussions that have started happening, and I expect that those conversations will continue. Equally, it's right to recognise these issues touch very deeply the Labour Party's sense of itself and the rights and responsibilities of members of Parliament. What I see is everyone trying to do their job well. Ministers trying to be open with Parliament as to the ambitions that we have. Members of Parliament being clear as to their responsibility to scrutinise this legislation and get it right. And that's the character of the conversation that's taking place between ministers and members of Parliament in the hours and days ahead.
Unequivocally, the government is saying the vote will go ahead on Tuesday?
Deputy Prime Minister made that clear yesterday.
OK, very interesting. So that's definitely going ahead then?
Well, as I say, the Deputy Prime Minister at the dispatch box in the House of Commons said the vote would happen.
Which, Amanda, I guess, wasn't explicitly saying it would go ahead, but creating... what it continues to do is create a massive problem for them if it doesn't go ahead.
Absolutely. I mean, I think what we heard from Douglas Alexander, there was a real attempt to kind of love bomb the rebels, you know, effectively making their argument for them, saying, you know, we understand why people in Labour want to see a better welfare system. They're just doing their job. They're looking out for their constituents. They feel morally obliged to do this, whereas fundamentally there is a major disagreement at the heart of the government over this because, yes, everyone agrees that it should be made easier for people who've been off with long-term sickness and disability to get back to work. But the disagreement is over whether you should also be trying to balance the books by making £5 billion of cuts effectively to the support offered to disabled people, whether or not they're in work or not. And that is what the rebels are complaining about. They're saying, well, if you're really focusing on trying to get people back to work, you need to bring forward the money that you're allocating to that and try and make it less restrictive, the level of support given to people who have disabilities.
It wasn't captured in that clip, but obviously the area that he and I sort of clashed the most about was his sort of suggestion that facing 120 rebels is par for the course and doesn't really matter, and he obviously made a comparison to the early days of Tony Blair's government, and maybe we'll play that clip in the next hour. But watching it back, and that sort of took my focus on the question, watching it back, the other point, which is a little bit rich to claim, is that, you know, this point of the process, we only are talking about the principles and we all agree about the principles. But that's sort of when you're just sort of laying out a manifesto. As soon as you introduce legislation, you're well beyond that point. And again, it's a bit rich to try and brush this all under the carpet, to say, actually, we all agree, and adding these levels of signatures to an amendment is, you know, means nothing because we haven't even got to the finer detail yet. Well, that's wrong. We're talking about a bill.
Absolutely, and the fact is they've not been in power for a year and already facing this massive rebellion, which is almost a third of Sir Keir Starmer's MPs potentially saying they're going to vote against the government on this. They want to kill one of the flagship bills, which Rachel Reeves is relying on to make her budget balance with these £5 billion in cuts. And I think the fact that these conversations are ongoing, clearly they're trying to reach some kind of deal with the rebels to offer some kind of concessions. We're hearing perhaps they might be changing the restrictions around eligibility for personal independence payments, so slightly more people will still be able to receive those payments, or perhaps pushing this all to the timeline a little bit so there's a bit more time for people to kind of adjust to the new system. But fundamentally, if they're defeated on this, that would be a major blow for Sir Keir Starmer's authority.
But the bill is going ahead on Tuesday because we were told so.
Angela Rayner said so.
Amanda, great stuff. Thanks so much. Appreciate it, as always. We'll talk a little bit more about that, by the way, of course, with the Conservatives, Andrew Griffith, at 8:15 in about 5 minutes. Let's turn, though, to the NATO summit next, and an eyebrow-raising comment from Secretary-General Mark Rutte, who referred to the US President Donald Trump as daddy. Have a listen.
Like two kids in a schoolyard, you know, they fight like hell. You can't stop them. Let them fight for about 2-3 minutes, then it's easier to stop them.
And then daddy has to sometimes use strong language.
You have to use strong language. Every once in a while you have to use a certain word.
Well, later on, our security and defence editor, Deborah Haynes, quizzed Donald Trump about that use of the word daddy.
Mark Rutte, the NATO chief, who is your friend, he called you daddy earlier. Do you regard your NATO allies as kind of children?
No, he likes me. I think he likes me. If he doesn't, I'll let you know. I'll come back and I'll hit him hard, okay? No? He did it very affectionate. Daddy, you're my daddy.
Do you regard your NATO allies, though, as kind of like children, and they're obviously listening to you and they're spending more, and you're obviously appreciative of that, but do you hope that actually they're going to be able to defend themselves, defend Europe on their own?
I think they need help a little bit at the beginning, and I think they'll be able to, and I think they're going to remember this day. And this is a big day for NATO.
Do you think they can do it without you, though, in the future? Can they do it without
Well, ask Mark.
States?
I mean, you have to ask Mark, okay?
And overnight, the White House posted on X on Donald Trump's return to the US, Daddy's home. So it really caught attention, and all credit to Deborah Haynes there for what was a pretty, by the way, extended back and forth, despite it being a press conference between Debs and the president. You know, the more I've watched that, the more I know it's very serious topics. We shouldn't always be amused. A, I'm amused, but B, it's rather a good analogy. The one that Mark Rutte used and Debs picked up on, which is he has sort of forced everybody to step up to the plate. It remains to be seen whether he's always there to back up the kids no matter what, which is the question I think we had coming in and we have coming out. But it's not a terrible analogy.
Well, I mean, it's realpolitik, isn't it? Fundamentally, America has all the cards, has all the power, and the European allies, as much as they want to stand up to their dad, fundamentally, need his backing. Certainly at the moment, he's hoping he'll set them on the path of greater defence independence. But I think it's just the use of that word daddy, isn't it? It's just cringy. I can't think of a better way for it.
Is, but also, to be fair to Mark Rutte, it's not his first language. His English is very good. Our producers in my ear saying it's a terrible analogy. I go back to when Michael Clark was sitting here yesterday. He was summarising the numbers, and I think it's something like 850 billion that the US spends on defence, and that all of the other NATO members combined is about half that.
Yeah.
So it is, in that sense, he's the daddy when it comes to defence spending.
Well, and also it's well chosen because it obviously has appealed to Donald Trump's sense of himself, and that kind of level of flattery, it's toe curling a little bit, but it's clearly worked, and they've got the backing from the US that they wanted out of the summit.
Yeah, I thought it was very interesting, and obviously he sent that text a few days earlier, Mark Rutte. I was scrolling back to see that, because if he put it in text, that really would have been toe curling. Hi, Daddy.
We all say things on the spur of the moment and maybe get a bit further than
exactly. Anyway, very interesting, Amanda. Great stuff. And again, great stuff to Deborah in The Hague for the NATO summit of the last few days. This week, the Health Secretary announced a national investigation into maternity services in England. There are calls for Oxford University hospitals to be included in that inquiry. Nearly 500 women have raised concerns about their care, telling Sky News they felt uncared for and ignored. Our health correspondent, Laura Bundock, has this report.
The birth of Morgan's second baby still haunts her. He was born by caesarean and rushed to special care.
There were midwives who believed that I was just too lazy to have a natural birth and said that I had made my son poorly by being lazy.
These careless comments from a midwife made Morgan feel like a failure.
Even though it was recommended by doctors that I had a caesarean, it was medically necessary, I felt like I should have done more to help him. Sorry.
And how are you now?
It still hurts to think back on it.
Morgan's among the 500 families calling for an inquiry into maternity care at Oxford University hospitals. Their testimonies speak of traumatic births and unsympathetic staff. I felt uncared for and ignored. I felt I was going to die. Annika had 3 miscarriages before giving birth to her son. She was refused a caesarean, contrary to national guidelines, and offered no pain relief despite repeated requests.
I'd said so many times that I was anxious, but it just never got taken seriously. It just kept getting brushed off, and they were just ignoring me. I was saying I was in pain. They were like, oh yeah, we'll get you something. Never did. It's clearly they never intended to.
Maternity care at Oxford University hospitals requires improvement, according to the latest inspection. It's not alone. Across England, 65%, almost 2/3 of acute hospital maternity services are judged either inadequate or requires improvement for safety. Not one rated outstanding. There have been 3 independent investigations into maternity failings, with a 4th in Nottingham ongoing. Between them, they've made 125 recommendations. But services are still in crisis. The Health Secretary, Wes Streetings, ordered a system-wide review. 10 poorly performing trusts will be scrutinised. The Trust says women are offered caesareans, and it's arranging to meet campaigners. The chief nurse told Sky News, "We regret any instance where we fail to provide the service that women and their family should expect. When this happens, we make every effort to review individual cases, to understand what went wrong and how we can improve. We are never complacent and welcome all feedback, whether positive or negative, as we learn from both." But those living with the trauma of their births want more. Their campaign won't stop until real change comes. Laura Bundock, Sky News, Oxford.
Well, Laura's with us now, and she'll be back as well at past, because we're going to dive into this in a bit more detail, both the principles but also some of the really compelling stories there.
I know, really strong stories, and unfortunately they're depressingly familiar. Families whose babies have died, families whose children are left with severe disabilities, mothers left with post-traumatic stress disorder following their birth. And unfortunately, this isn't an isolated thing in Oxford. We're seeing this nationwide. It really is a crisis, and yet this is despite the fact we've had so many really significant inquiries into maternity failings, not just the ones at individual trusts. We've also had the CQC, the health regulator, saying things aren't right. And we've had that really high-profile cross-party report last year from Westminster as well. And despite this, nothing seems to be changing, and nothing seems to be changing quickly enough, which is why we're hearing more and more of these stories. And of course, giving birth is always going to be unpredictable. There will always be a risk. But why isn't it that parents don't go into these units feeling safe, they don't feel supported, and in the case of many mums, they don't feel listened to either?
Laura, great stuff, and as we mentioned back at 8:30, as we'll discuss this in more detail. Time for some of this morning's other top stories. The number of IVF births in the UK are on the rise, with 1 in every 32 babies born from the fertility treatment. On average, that's 1 child in every class born as a result of IVF. The report by the fertility regulator also found more women are now freezing their eggs. The US government's actions around the death of Harry Dunn won't be scrutinised as part of a British parliamentary review. The review set to probe support offered by the Foreign Office after the teenager was killed by former US government employee Anne Sakoulas in 2019. Selling cannabis without a prescription is once again becoming a criminal offence in Thailand, just 3 years after it was decriminalised. The move to decriminalise cannabis boosted Thailand's tourism, but since then the country's faced a backlash over allegations that lack of regulations made the drug available to children and caused addiction. Right, let's return now to the day's top stories and get the Conservatives' view on all affairs. I'm delighted I'm joined by the Shadow Business and Trade Secretary, Andrew Griffith. A very good morning to you.
Good morning.
What's your take on the unfolding situation on the welfare reform bill? In principle, the Conservatives want to see this sort of reform go ahead?
Yes, absolutely. It shouldn't be a Westminster bubble story. The need for Westminster reform, for welfare reform, if we're serious about growing the economy, reducing the burden of tax, is incredibly important. Now, we've talked about the sort of reform that would work for us, that we would support, one that's fair to the taxpayers, so it actually reduces the bill rather than just stops it growing quite as quickly. Critically, one that gets more people back into work. That's the fair way to reduce welfare, is actually move people off welfare into work, particularly if you've got conditions around mental health, anxiety. Actually, the workplace, a supportive workplace, can be a really good place for you rather than being written off indefinitely to stay at home.
Take us back a step if you can.
Yeah.
Why, in your assessment, has the welfare bill in total grown so much in the last 5 years?
Well, the big increase is the change in definition as to what counts as a disability, from the sort of physical disabilities that people would once have associated with being disabled, getting that sort of support, to very real conditions that can be very debilitating, but around anxiety and mental health. And that we've seen that, and it's followed a very different trajectory to those in most other European countries. So we know we're doing something different. What we need to do is give more support, including the ability to try the world of work without the jeopardy to your benefits. But we also need to make sure that there's lots of jobs and employers ready to take people on. And it's not entirely unrelated to the level of the high level of low unskilled immigration we've had in this country as well, that people have been able to overlook people who are on welfare and go somewhere else to hire somebody.
It's a very politically contentious, morally contentious issue, and clearly one that's very hard to address fundamentally and politically, as I guess the numbers would highlight in this problem, or the amount being spent on it growing during your government. Before we get into the detail, do you have sympathy with the challenge that Keir Starmer therefore has on getting something like this through?
Not a great deal, if I'm honest, because the government has got a very big majority, and if they approach this in a thoughtful way, and remember, they didn't talk about this for the first 7 months of government. Rachel Reeves discovered she had a £7 billion hole in her forecasts, and all of a sudden, this particular form of welfare reform was top of the list. And so it's not the thoughtful, almost consensus building, focusing on getting people into employment reform that would be worthy of any government. And if they were doing that, as I say, they could attract much more cross-party support. So it is a bit rushed. It's a bit focusing on one or two individual measures rather than something a bit more holistic. And critically, Wilf, the government's own assessment says that this won't change the number of people going into work. So if that's one of the key tests of a good welfare reform, it's not just slicing money off welfare, the amount people receive, because some people, will end up the wrong side of that. The real reform that's structural is to get people into work, and this reform the government's proposing doesn't do that.
I mean, clearly there's pressure from their own party to amend the bill that the government may or may not adhere to or resist in some way. Is it playing politics a bit from your side to try and say, oh, well, if you make these changes, we'll support it? Realistically, they're not going to do anything that you want. So I kind of come back to the question, if there's a vote on Tuesday, in principle, this is an area that your party wants reformed, that you failed to reform in office. Should you support it regardless, or is it more sort of politically successful for you if the government loses a vote?
Look, I don't think it is about politics. I do think it is about principles. Conservative principles are protect the taxpayer interest. If the government rule out, it shouldn't be controversial, Wilf, at this stage, having raised £70 billion a year of extra public spending from taxes and borrowing already, it should not be the slightest source of controversy for the Chancellor to come back today and say, I'm not going to put up taxes anymore. I've already done enough damage to the economy. But they're not doing that.
But that is really a separate issue to try and tie it specifically to this. And that's where I come back to this coming across as political game playing. We can argue all day long about whether last year's autumn statement or this year's budget contained the right or the wrong packages. But reality is there's not much money to go around. There wasn't at the back end of your government. And a lot has changed outside of the Chancellor's control. And so just to arbitrarily say no more taxes no matter what and link it to this, she can't say that.
The biggest... Well, I'm not sure that's true, actually. The biggest challenge that we have... they say, for example... They say exactly the reciprocal of that, where they say no return to austerity. That is effectively ruling out the sort of cuts in the public sector in Whitehall that this country badly needs. The biggest challenge we've got, one of the reasons we even talk about welfare, is because our economy is not growing. Now, that's deep-seated. I'm not saying that's all on this government. But if you think the number one crisis is we're not growing, we're not prosperous enough. I'm making a speech later today where I'll highlight the fact that we're 29th in the global ranking of world competitive nations. I don't want that for our children. I don't want that for our grandchildren. We absolutely need to get back, catapult ourselves back into the top 10 of global competitive nations. And you are not going to do that if she comes back this autumn and puts up taxes. So ruling out putting up taxes should be an absolute no-brainer right now.
You know, these are long-term issues, and I guess you could debate whether bigger government, smaller government will work long-term as opposed to short-term. Just finally, because you mentioned your speech, and I know this is why you're coming on today, you're pledging, because we've waited a lot for specific policies, you've got a specific policy as it relates to employment rights.
Yeah, specific policy designed to help the economy grow and boost employment. If Labour proceed, as they shouldn't, but if they proceed with their 300-page red tape unemployment rights bill, then we will repeal all of the sections that relate to trade union rights, effectively going back to a consensus that served this country well. Tony Blair didn't change that, Gordon Brown didn't change that. Unfortunately, this government, in a very dogmatic way, is seeking to change that, and we will reverse that when we get back into government.
I'm just interested on this because I think last time we discussed this when you came on, the area that you focused on that you didn't like in the bill was making it harder to remove an employee in the first 2 years. But you're happy for that to stay?
No, that will go as well. So it's a complicated concept, but this idea of day one rights, that you can turn up for work in the morning and if things aren't entirely to your satisfaction, you can go and take your employer to an employment tribunal. Probably have to wait nearly 2 years to get a case because the court backlogs are so bad. And that's very, very damaging to employers taking a chance. You know, when you apply for a job, you put in your resume, you maybe have 1 or 2 interviews, but essentially people are giving you a chance, and that's why we have those periods so that people can do a little bit of a test and learn with each other and find if that works. Who will suffer? The people that will suffer will be the most vulnerable, people with a checkered employment history, perhaps people who've been in prison but deserve their second chance of life, but they won't get that if employers feel that they can't take people on, they can't make that risk.
Andrew Griffith, thanks for joining us. Good to see you. The Shadow Business and Trade Secretary there. We're going to have a quick look at the weather.
A bright start and always a warm welcome. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
It'll be unsettled into next week, especially in the north and the west, and will turn very warm again. It's mostly warm and humid now, with outbreaks of rain over northern and western Britain and showers for eastern England. But Ireland and Northern Ireland are mostly fine. Britain will see increasingly showery rain clearing across the east this morning, with more scattered showers following, but western parts will turn mainly dry and sunny. Ireland and Northern Ireland, meanwhile, will see a few showers developing.
A bright start and always a warm welcome. Qatar Airways sponsors the weather.
Still to come here on The Breakfast Show, we will be debating the issues facing maternity services as the government announces a national inquiry.
Our app gives you the very best of Sky News wherever you are. Breaking news, videos and analysis.
Evidence of the crisis.
Podcasts, watching us live.
Live here from Washington.
Wherever you get your podcast.
All in one place. And all at just the touch of a screen. The Sky News app. Get the full story first.
We're rolling.
Welcome to the world.
Our new podcast. It's starting now. It's very exciting. Every week, we'll be reporting from the world's trouble spots.
We get to hold those in positions of power accountable, and we get to ask the questions that the audience, the listeners, want to know about.
And that's why it is so important that people tune in, come along for the road, come along for the journey. It'll be fun.
Well, welcome back to the Breakfast Show. Well, coming up in just a moment, we'll be talking about concerns over the quality of maternity care. But first, a reminder of our top stories this hour. The medicines regulators reported hundreds of cases of pancreatic problems linked to weight loss jabs. 10 deaths have been recorded, though there's no evidence Wegovy, Manjaro and Ozempic, taken by more than 1 million people in the UK, were directly responsible. Sir Keir Starmer's top team is asking Labour MPs to stop supporting a move which could derail changes to the benefit system in England and Wales. Trade Minister Douglas Alexander told this programme a few minutes, an hour and a half ago, that the vote would definitely go ahead on Tuesday and discussions would continue right up until then. There are calls for Oxford University hospitals to be included in an inquiry into NHS maternity services in England. Nearly 500 women have come forward, raising concerns about their care, telling Sky News they felt uncared for and ignored. Let's return to that story, the concerns over maternity care that have prompted the government to order a national inquiry. Well, we're joined now by Jill Walton, the Chief Executive of the Royal College of Midwives, and Rachel Coles, who experienced a traumatic birth herself. Laura's here as well. Laura, just set up the story for us once again.
So a group of parents who were treated under Oxford University Hospitals Trust have formed a campaign unhappy with the care, and the stories are varied, but in some cases really distressing. So babies being lost, children left with disabilities, mothers suffering severely from birth trauma, in some cases post-traumatic stress disorder. And unfortunately, these are the kind of stories that we've heard before, that there is this nationwide crisis within maternity services. And just this week, Wes Streeting, the Health Secretary, announced this big kind of review, big investigation into the whole system. But of course, we've had a lot of this before. We've had various trusts investigated. We've had a huge number of recommendations made. We've had the health regulator, the CQC, highlighting problems within maternity. And we've had that very high-profile cross-party report into birth trauma just last year, a year ago, in fact. And yet it seems it's taking a very long time for any change to happen. And these stories are becoming the norm almost. And as we were saying, it is a risky business giving birth. Births can be unpredictable. But I think any parent deserves the right to go into a unit feeling safe, feeling supported, and I think feeling listened to as well in the case of many mothers.
Let's talk to Rachel and Jill. And Rachel, if we can come to you first of all, this sort of traumatic birth experience, sadly, is something that you've had to go through.
Yeah, I experienced it with my only child. So we've decided not to have any more children purely based on the fact that the birth was so traumatic. I almost lost my life. I had a postpartum hemorrhage and it was due to failings that they did. They were short-staffed and I was just left.
And were there, Rachel, in your case, warning signs, things that they could have done differently that weren't done?
Yeah, they'd left me for a very long time contracting. Waters had already broken. The 24-hour window from when your waters break wasn't adhered to. They left me on the Pitocin drip for too long. Anything that could go wrong went wrong that day.
Jill, when you hear examples like this, is it something that you think is rare, or does it happen too often? And any idea why these sorts of things happen?
Yes, and it's hard to hear your story, Rachel. And actually,
Midwives tell us that they are distressed by stories just like Rachel's and the unavoidable harm. The recommendations that you've just talked about have not been funded appropriately. There has been some improvement, but it's not good enough. And that's what all of the staff say too. The system has failed women and the staff working in maternity services.
Jill, just one question really. It's about the culture. Many parents have told me recently there is a sort of almost defensive culture that they have a midwife who comes across as unsympathetic, uncaring. Now, compassion is free. Is there a problem with a culture that leads to this kind of behaviour and women having to describe, uncaring midwives?
And that's really hard to hear. All midwives, however busy they are, need to be kind, but they feel so unsupported themselves. They really put their head down and try and deliver the best care they can. What staff tell us is that every day they go to work feeling frightened and scared that they can't provide safe and high quality care. However, there are some good services and some good outcomes and some women who are really satisfied with maternity services. So we don't want to worry women who are currently in the system.
Rachel, from your experience, was it a sort of across the board issue or was it midwives? Was it doctors? Was it what you sensed? Go ahead.
Yeah, it started from day one of my pregnancy. So my community hospital were absolutely shocking. Didn't listen to my concerns about my mental health. I was already showing signs of antenatal depression, wasn't listened to. I was just told, oh, everyone gets this. And I'm there like, not everyone feels like they don't want to live. So there is a concern. And then doctors at the hospital, I was consultant-led, didn't listen to me. I had one doctor say we should do a C-section towards the end of your pregnancy. The next time I saw a completely different person who said, no, C-section is not necessary in your instance. So I've got these conflicting opinions all the time. And then during the actual process of labour, I just was not listened to at all. The consistency, again, was not there. It was a different doctor or a different midwife all the time. And then afterwards as well, again, there was nobody actually there who was central to my care, especially after what I'd experienced, and nobody who explained to me at the time what happened to me. All I knew, I lost blood, I was in theatre. I did not know that I was actually so close to dying.
And Rachel, that's obviously the birth experience, but the effects are profound, aren't they? Just tell us a little bit about the impact of your traumatic birth and how it's affected you since.
Yeah, so I got diagnosed with PTSD, depression and anxiety after birth. The PTSD lasted for a long time. And actually, I'd say as a woman, having experienced the blood loss when you have your first period after birth, that was really triggering for me. So again, I was experiencing blood loss. In my head, blood, I'm dying. So for a long time, that just kept happening. I kept going into this spiral with poor mental health. And it took me about 2 years to recover. I can't remember the first year of my son's life. However much I'd love to remember all these memories, I don't remember holding him as a newborn baby. I don't remember him reaching certain milestones because for me, it was safer to block all of that out. And I'm never going to be able to experience that again. So for me, I've lost a whole year of my son's life and those memories that, again, I won't ever have.
Jill, do you think that the new government, the new health secretary, is making progress in addressing some of these problems? When you hear of big sweeping investigations being announced, do you and other midwives welcome that, or do you feel like there's going to be some blame thrown around in an unfair way? What's the latest sentiment amongst the group you represent?
We absolutely welcome a rapid review of maternity services and attention. We want maternity care to be right on the top of the list. It is unacceptable that people like Rachel have had experiences like they have. And as a midwife, I find that really distressing. We have been calling out for many, many years for attention and funding for maternity services, time to train, time to listen, teams that can get better at working together, which we're leading from the colleges that are involved in maternity and neonatal care. And it is, enough is enough. And we will be holding West Streeting to account. And I hope women and families do too. And if we can do that together, we have a fighting chance for maternity services this time to get better.
Jill and Rachel, thank you both very much for joining us. We really do appreciate it. And Laura, do just remind us what has been announced by Wes Streeting earlier in the week.
So he's announced a rapid investigation, which takes two parts. The first part's going to be looking in close focus, scrutinising up to 10 trusts that are poorly performing at the moment. That's what the Oxford families want to be part of. A couple of areas have been suggested already. We don't know what the full 10, who the full 10 will be. But then there is a wider investigation looking at more broadly what needs to happen. And I think what everyone agrees is that something needs to happen. There is a genuine crisis here. There's a lot of talk about it, but we've had a lot of talk about it in the past. And I think what everyone, not just Jill, not just Rachel, everyone wants to see is palpable change following all the talk.
Laura, great stuff. Thanks so much, Laura Bundock there. Now, the former England manager, Gareth Southgate, Sir Gareth Southgate, has received a knighthood for services to football at Windsor Castle. And afterwards, he spoke to Sky's Geraint Hughes about receiving the honour, leading, of course, England to the finals as well of the Euros, and what he plans to do next.
An amazing privilege, and I have to say I was more emotional than I thought I would be, but amazing experience for my whole family today.
Sir Gareth Southgate, for services to association football.
The lovely thing is that you get to meet so many people who've done incredible things for our country, so to meet other award winners was very, very special. The Prince has been an incredible supporter of the England team anyway, so we've been fortunate to share some amazing moments and some disappointments where he's come and spoke brilliantly to the team, so it was great to see him again.
What's the thing that's given you maybe time to look back on things with England, the most satisfaction?
Yeah, I mean, I think results, firstly. Not quite where we wanted to get to at the very end, but I think still an incredibly consistent period of English football. And yeah, the journey that we went on, fans and team, working with a very special group of players, very special group of staff. They're the emotional things that you look back on. Of course, the games are very important, but the relationships that you build and the times that you spend together with people that are close to you are very, very special.
Highs and lows? What was the highest high? What were some of the not so great moments?
Yeah, I mean, it's a constant roller coaster with England. I mean, I'll never forget walking around Wembley, having beaten Denmark in the semi-final and taken the country to a first final in over 50 years. That was, at a moment where the country had been through a difficult time with COVID, as had everybody. But so that was an amazing feeling of unifying people for the period between the semi-final and the final as well. And then the finals were low points, but. Nevertheless, I'm still proud of what the team did and how far we got.
What next for you?
Obviously doing some more work following on from the Dimbleby lecture with the landscape for young men in particular in this country. I do some coach mentoring. I've got a couple of business ventures that are just bubbling away. And I'm enjoying a different pace of life, and I'm very content.
Sir Gareth Southgate there. Now, England will play Germany in the final of the Under-21s European Championship on Saturday after a dramatic late win against the Netherlands. Lee Carsley's side won the tournament 2 years ago and progressed to the final thanks to 2 goals from Liverpool's Harvey Elliott. This goal, 5 minutes from time, made it 2-1. Germany, meanwhile, beat France 3-0 in the other semi to set up a showdown with England against Bratislava on Saturday evening. Right, we're going to take a quick break here. When we come back, we're going to be talking about 25 years of the Caldwell Children's Charity following last night's butterfly ball. That's coming up next.
I'm Mark Stone and I'm Sky's correspondent based here in Washington, D.C.
We'd been warned that we would meet people in the lowest moment of their lives.
Their story is one of fundamental American failure. Well, a slow drive for the president as he approaches his golf club, but I have to say there are more media here than there are supporters.
We love Trump!
I've witnessed the remarkable passion for politics here, but the anger too. This is just the audience that Joe Biden wanted.
Is this the moment to reform gun laws?
You know, it's easy to go to politics.
But it's important. It's at the heart of the issue.
For all the talk of a toned-down, humbled Trump, yes, maybe there was just a little less rhetoric, a little less divisiveness, but in the end it was the same rhythm, the same speech, the same man.
All them people that died in Russia and Ukraine, they'd still be alive today if Donald Trump was president.
If it was my wish, have a businessman that's strong like Trump, but maybe just doesn't say as much, you know?
We are under Israeli military restrictions in terms of some of the things that we can film, but it's important to be in there. What we've been allowed to see over here is a humanitarian corridor. Free wherever you get your news. A young American medical student is making remarkable things happen.
I've seen a lot of difficult things, and honestly, it breaks my heart. These children don't deserve that.
I don't think there's a single Arab I know who isn't seriously disturbed by what's going on.
And so they gathered for this wonder of nature.
I'm very excited right now.
This is an extraordinary moment beyond anything I could have expected. Sky News, get the full story first.
What might happen if Russia attacked the UK?
This is clearly an enormous show of force.
It is definitely out of the ordinary.
We ran a war game with former ministers back in the hot seat.
Ben Wallace.
Amber Rudd.
Jack Straw.
It's the kind of war game that's genuinely tested inside government.
The Russians are signalling that there may be an attack.
Russia knows our weaknesses, but do you? I'm Deborah Haynes. From Sky News and Tortoise, this is The War Game. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
I'm Stephen Murphy, and I'm Sky's Ireland correspondent based here in Dublin.
The waters of Ireland and Britain should be home to great white sharks. If there are great white sharks in this area, there's no reason they wouldn't come here to feed. It's basically a buffet on a beach.
This could be not only a record-breaking storm, but potentially the most dangerous storm ever to hit Ireland.
Welcome back. The Butterfly Ball was held last night as part of the Caldwell Children Charity's efforts to raise money for children living with a disability and autism. The founder of the charity, John Caldwell, and one of the many beneficiaries, Dylan Kelsall, both join me now. A very good morning to you both. Great to have you with us. And also, John, we should say this is 25 years of the charity since
25 years, yeah. I founded it in the year 2000. So, and we've helped. We've probably had around about 100,000 incidents of help during that period. And of course, it's ramping up dramatically.
Well, I mean, amazing numbers. But just give us a snapshot for people that don't know much about the charity. Why did you found it? What's the kind of focus of the charity?
Well, I always had a passion to try and help change people's lives in some way. And when I sold the business, or before I sold the business, I decided that I really needed to do something for children. And I thought children, because children who've had no life, you can make a big difference to the outcome by helping them develop and have a proper life, or the best life that they can have. So it just became a passion and a compelling situation, which I was sort of almost, people say, why did you do it? And I said, well, why wouldn't I? And I felt that I got no option. I had to do it.
But it's particularly children with disabilities that you focus on, or?
Caldwell Children is, yes, but Caldwell Youth does kids. I mean, we're not talking about that, of course, but Caldwell Youth helps all kids with who come from an underprivileged background and are vulnerable. Mm-hmm. So it's just children in general are my passion to help them have a better life.
And Dylan, you're at the first important question. You were at the party last night. Decent bash?
Oh, it was great. It was honestly, it was amazing.
And well, talk us through specifically what happened last night. Obviously, it was a fun party. We were just talking about it at the Dorchester, but an important party, and you were part of raising a lot of money.
Yeah, it was a place for people with like-minded people like John to get together and try and raise money for people with disabilities and autism, and it's a chance for them to use their money for a better cause.
And you raised how much last night?
1.5 million.
What?
And Dylan came on stage with me to raise the wheelchair pledge, which is always a very, very successful pledge for people, because they can see people like Dylan desperately need this wheelchair to then enhance their lives, to give them a life, actually. It's well, Dylan will tell you more about it. Why don't you tell them what difference it makes?
Well, the difference of a Caldwell Children chair, it's literally night and day. It's having a life and not having a life. It's, you know, it's immeasurable, really. Without the chair, I can't be me, and I wouldn't be able to do the things that I do.
Talk us through, if you don't mind, Dylan, like how long your relationship's been with the charity. So when did it give you your life, as it were?
Well, so I first got support from Caldwell in 2013 with a football wheelchair, which allowed me to play the sports power chair football, which is same as a running game, but with you know, just you drive with a joystick instead of using your legs, and it started off then. That's allowed me to play for my country. It's allowed me to do all the things that I never thought I'd be able to.
And it's surprisingly difficult because they invited me along
I was going to say, you didn't look much in control in this video.
Oh, you've got it. I mean, I wasn't in control at all, no. I mean, I think that video just shows it. I think they all took pity on me, but I was pretty poor at that.
And so, Dylan, I mean, what's so impressive is clearly this has made a huge difference to you, but you haven't just kind of accepted the help, which you'd be well within your rights to do, but you also want to help the charity as well go on to the next level, as I guess your participation last night was an example of.
Yeah, definitely. It's I'm very passionate about trying to raise money for the wheelchairs in particular, because I mean, a lot of people who go to those events might say, why would we need to donate for wheelchairs? You can get a standard NHS wheelchair. And the simple answer I can say to that is an NHS wheelchair is like someone giving you a pair of slippers and telling you to climb a mountain. It's not doable.
John, I wasn't going to go there, but given Dylan mentioned it, I mean, is it a shame that charities like yours are needed, or
I think it's just a fact of life. Yeah. Like, you know, I mean, governments have got nowhere near enough income to do what's needed, and who's going to pick up the pieces? It's not going to be the government ever. And why shouldn't wealthy people join in, raise money, and try and make up that shortfall? Mm-hmm. They're not very keen on paying the extra taxes that would be needed to help kids like Dylan. So why not drive charities forward to make a big difference to people's lives, whether it's children or anybody else's life? So I think the charitable sector is vital to the fabric of society. Mm-hmm. But it would be good if rich people paid more tax as well. Yeah, well, it's, I guess, a snapshot in the current debates in Parliament about the difficulties of paying for everything. Just finally, because we're running out of time, John, we mentioned how much you raised in total. How many of the wheelchair pledges did Dylan achieve with you last night? We got, I think it was 16 wheelchairs. Fantastic. So at £30,000 each. So it's a phenomenal fundraiser, and that transforms the lives of all those children who are waiting for these powered chairs. Well, Dylan, well done for achieving that last night, and no doubt you're very grateful. 25 years for the charity. Yeah, 25 years gone, hopefully 25 more years of the exact same success. And working for the charity as well. Yeah, absolutely. Well, Dylan, John, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it. Appreciate it, thank you. Fantastic cause, and 25 years, congratulations. We are going to have a quick look at the weather.
The ideal atmosphere, whatever the altitude. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
It'll be unsettled into next week, especially in the north and the west, and will turn very warm again. It's mostly warm and humid now, with outbreaks of rain over northern and western Britain and showers for eastern England, but Ireland and Northern Ireland are mostly fine. Britain will see increasingly showery rain clearing across the east this morning, with more scattered showers following, but western parts will turn mainly dry and sunny. Ireland and Northern Ireland, meanwhile, will see a few showers developing. It'll be a bit cooler and fresher. Eastern Britain will see showers clearing during the first part of the afternoon, leaving England, Wales and southern Scotland dry and sunny.
Breathtaking views with clear skies ahead. Qatar Airways sponsors the weather.
Well, we've got just a couple of minutes left. We can mention the big news today that we know who the director of the next James Bond movie will be, Denis Villeneuve, who we discussed earlier. Of course, best known to me as the director of the Dune films, which Sadia hasn't seen, but Amanda and I are big fans of. I thought they were epic, actually.
I mean, the most incredible cinematic experience, the soundtrack, oh, absolutely incredible.
I mean, not sure if the new Bond film will be set in a desert, but if it is, this man knows how to direct it. Raises the question of could Timothée Chalamet be the next Bond? Probably not.
No, too weedy.
Do you have a favoured choice, anyone? I'm coming round to the idea of Henry Cavill. I was against it for a long time, but he's grown on me. He could be good.
He's a bit robotic, though, isn't he?
He is a bit.
But then maybe that is a kind of Bondy thing. Idris Elba, maybe he's getting...
Idris Elba would unquestionably have been my first choice had he been a little bit younger. Are we allowed to say that? Had he been a little bit younger. He's too old to take her.
Yeah.
So have you got a first choice?
No, I haven't, but I don't know why Tom Hiddleston isn't ever spoken about.
Yes, he would be excellent.
He'd be really good because he'd also be able to dance.
Yeah, that's true. The other person who literally is never mentioned, and whenever I say this, everyone kind of, agrees that he shouldn't be, but it's Charlie Hunnam, who I always think's epic. You're like, who the hell's that? There we go. That's why he's obviously not mentioned. Favourite Bond movies?
Wow.
Thunderball, we've got perfect. This is my favourite of the oldies, and then Casino Royale I thought was fantastic.
Casino Royale. I've got a favourite Bond moment.
Which is?
I've got an itch, do you mind?
What's that? Which one is that?
I think it's from Casino Royale.
Oh, that's excellent.
There we go.
Oh, the setting of that.
The other thing I want is a spin-off with an old James Bond with Pierce Brosnan. That'd be fantastic. I'm not against the spin-offs as much as some people are. Anyway, it's Jeff Bezos who owns its wedding this weekend as well, so congrats to him. Good luck with that. It's going to cost you a little bit by all accounts. We're out of time. We'll be back after this.
Turkey is burying its dead.
Whole families died in this collapse. Generations wiped out. I'm Siobhan Robbins, Sky's Europe correspondent based here in Berlin.
This is just a small sample of the deadly arsenal taken off the streets.
Anyone could say, I'll do that, and then have to go and shoot someone.
Yes.
Sky News. Get the full story first.
Good morning to you. It's 9 o'clock on today's show. New fears over weight loss jabs. 10 people have died, reporting severe side effects.
Plus, growing reports that the government is preparing to back down on welfare reform in the face of a major Labour rebellion. We'll hear from Sir Keir Starmer when he speaks live at 9:15.
It is Thursday, the 26th of June. Your headlines. A probe is launched into why some users of weight loss drugs are suffering problems with their pancreas. The government refuses to be drawn on whether concessions will be made to the welfare bill as rebellion within the party grows, but the government insists the vote will go ahead next week.
These issues touch very deeply the Labour Party's sense of itself and the rights and responsibilities of members of Parliament.
Nearly 500 women raised concerns about maternity care they received at the Oxford University Hospitals Trust. And Canadian Denis Villeneuve is announced as the director of the next James Bond film. A very good morning to you. 10 people have died after reporting a severe side effect from weight loss injections. Doctors started offering the jabs on the NHS this week, but some patients have reported pancreas problems. Medical regulators have launched an investigation to try and understand the cause of the adverse reaction. Sandy is here to talk to us about the details. But first, let's hear from the regulator, Alison Cave.
One side effect which is, although uncommon, may be more serious, is something called acute pancreatitis, and that's an inflammation of your pancreas. And this may be serious, and it's useful for me if I might just take a minute to explain to people what the main symptom of this may be, which is a severe pain in the stomach, which then may radiate to the back and doesn't go away. And if anyone who experiences should seek immediate medical help.
Sadia, talk to us about when and how this has all arisen, because obviously the timing is interesting given that this is being announced the same week that this became available on the NHS.
Yeah, I think there'll be lots of questions about that. Why are we hearing about this now, 3 or 4 days after the weight loss jabs were first introduced into the NHS? But weight loss jabs have been around for a long time. Many people, in fact 1.5 million people across the UK are on some sort of weight loss jabs programmes, whether through private prescriptions or from specific weight loss schemes. But today's concerns primarily are about the impact it has on people's pancreas, because there have been hundreds of reports of issues that people have faced following taking weight loss jabs. These problems, I have to say, didn't start on Monday. They're related to when they've been collected as data from when the licenses were approved for these weight loss jabs. So in the case of Mounjaro, that would be November 2023. And the problems, let's be really clear about this, are linked to people taking weight loss jabs, not necessarily caused by them.
What's going to now happen in terms? This isn't a sort of full review. It's slightly different to a kind of normal process.
It's a study to look into what could be a cause, and one of the things that they're looking at specifically is anything genetic that may have caused this. So the study is called the Yellow Card Biobank, and the idea is if somebody presents at hospital, is admitted at hospital with this, then they should raise this matter. That should be then looked at, and there should be some genetic testing done on those people.
So, great stuff. Thanks so much. Now, we are expecting, by the way, to hear from the Prime Minister in the next 10-15 minutes or so, following him returning back from his foreign trips, of course, most recently with NATO. And it comes as there are growing reports that the government's preparing to back down on cuts to disability benefits in the face of a major Labour Party rebellion. The Government Minister Douglas Alexander joined us this morning on that very topic. Here's part of the discussion. You could have had these discussions with your colleagues weeks or months ago, so it didn't lead to a point where 120 of your MPs have publicly said, we do not agree with our government on this central policy.
So I hope that this is an instance where maybe experience lends perspective. I was part of Tony Blair's government and Gordon Brown's government. I will remember what was a large rebellion very early after the 1997 landslide over the issue of lone parent benefits. What happened was a significant rebellion. There were screaming headlines. People were saying lessons must be learned. And what followed that rebellion was not just the largest fall in child poverty that we'd seen in generations, the largest fall in pensioner poverty, but a Labour government that had the capacity to come together and deliver for the people of the United Kingdom. I have every confidence that in time there will be a sense of proportionality and scale that's perhaps missing in some of the newspaper headlines this morning, because actually this is Parliament doing its job, it's the government doing its job for the people, and we're going to move forward together.
Well, with all due respect, you're implicitly suggesting that I'm inexperienced, and I'm afraid anyone can look at this.
I'm not saying that at all. I'm just offering the perspective of having gone through a previous rebellion where people said this was, if you like, of seismic consequence for the future of the Prime Minister, that Tony Blair had misjudged the issue. And the reality was that Tony Blair went on to be an extraordinarily successful Prime Minister in the course of that Parliament and in the subsequent years. So I think sometimes that historical perspective is useful.
120 MPs, including 11 committee chairs, is significant whichever way you try and frame this. And let's see what the Prime Minister meets when he comes home from NATO. And just to follow up on this, I don't think Tony Blair ever faced, a year into his government, what you face today with a new YouGov MRP poll that suggests your seats in Parliament, if an election was held today, would halve to 178. Did Tony Blair face that? I'm a bit inexperienced. Can you clarify for me?
He didn't face the multi-party politics that is a feature of politics more than 20 years after his time in office. But did we face challenging headlines and difficult political issues? 100%. The fact is, what we read in that MRP poll is a snapshot of public opinion less than a year, just under a year, into a Labour government that has a mandate for 5 years. So should we take it seriously? Yes, we absolutely should. As a snapshot of opinion today, but not necessarily a good guide to where we will be at the time of the general election. The greatest antidote to reform is an effective Labour government. We have time, we have the capacity to govern well over the coming 4 years. And when I read those headlines, what it teaches me is that there is undoubtedly a hunger for change in the country. That's what got us elected in July. It's why we feel the pressure of public opinion. But it's why we've already delivered, for example, lower waiting lists for the first time since 2008. It's why we've delivered a rise in the national minimum wage. It's why we are busting our tails to deliver trade deals, growth and jobs for people in the United Kingdom. So we take that as an instruction to make sure that we move further and faster in relation to the change that we fully accept people want to see.
Convenient to use the historic example of the Tony Blair government when it suits you, but versus when it doesn't. Well, Amanda's here to discuss some of the significance of this. I mean, it's absolutely fascinating, of course, weighing up whether this vote's definitely going to go ahead or not. His answer on that topic was that it would, because Angela Rayner told us so yesterday, and the extent to which they do soften the position or not, which itself does imply that this is a really big issue for them.
Well, yes, indeed, and I think certainly that's the messaging we're getting from government ministers. Number 10 is that they are holding discussions with the rebels, which surely they're going to have something to offer them in order to get them to pull back from this absolutely colossal rebellion. This is almost a third of the Parliamentary Labour Party's MPs signalling that they want to vote down what is a key plank of the government's legislative agenda in their first year of office. The number of MPs who publicly signed this amendment has now gone up to 126, bearing in mind it was originally only 108. So over the past few days, when you've had cabinet ministers ringing round trying to get the other MPs into line, you've actually seen an increase in the size of the rebellion, which isn't a great sign. But I think what the government are trying to indicate is that they are listening. I think that's what we heard from Douglas Alexander, you know, really sort of trying to argue that they're all on the same team, that everyone wants to see welfare reform. Well, that might be the case, but many of the party clearly don't want to see cuts to the benefits offered to help sick and disabled people deal with the costs of living with their disability, which, of course, that's the key plank of the rebels' issue with the welfare cuts, is not about the fact that they want to try and get more people into work. It's about this additional support for people with day-to-day life. They might be able to mitigate that somewhat by making more people continue to be eligible for these payments. They might cut it somewhat, not quite as much as they want to. They're trying to save £5 billion here, so if they do offer something to the rebels, then the big question is, how do they go on and balance the books?
Yeah, great stuff on that, Amanda. By the way, the Prime Minister, as we mentioned earlier, due to speak at 9:15. He's going to be talking at the British Chamber of Commerce. Whether or not the welfare bill will come up or not remains to be seen. But either way, a speech in about 5 minutes' time. We'll bring that to you live. Of course, he's just returned from the NATO summit, and there was an eyebrow-raising comment from the Secretary-General Mark Rutte, who referred to the US President Donald Trump as Daddy.
Like two kids in a schoolyard, you know, they fight like hell. You can't stop them. Let them fight for about 2-3 minutes, then it's easier to stop them.
And then Daddy has to sometimes use strong language.
You have to use strong language. Every once in a while, you have to use a certain word.
Well, off the back of that, our security and defence editor Deborah Haynes then quizzed President Trump about the way that Mark Rutte referred to him as Daddy.
Mark Rutte, the NATO chief, who is your friend, he called you Daddy earlier. Do you regard your NATO allies as kind of children?
No, he likes me. I think he likes me. If he doesn't, I'll let you know. I'll come back and I'll hit him hard, okay? No? He did it very affectionate. Daddy, you're my daddy.
Do you regard your NATO allies, though, as kind of like children, and they're obviously listening to you and they're spending more, and you're obviously appreciative of that, but do you hope that actually they're going to be able to defend themselves, defend Europe on their own?
I think they need help a little bit at the beginning, and I think they'll be able to, and I think they're going to remember this day, and this is a big day for NATO.
Do you think they can do it without you, though, in the future? Can they do it without
Well, ask Mark.
States?
I mean, you have to ask Mark, okay?
Well, then, overnight, as President Trump touched back down in the United States, the White House posted this on X, saying, Daddy's home. So it really kicked off a great little sort of storyline with interesting and important implications, man. A great credit to Deborah Haynes on making that the question. There's sort of some truth in it, and I thought it was interesting towards the end that overall the tone of this NATO summit was pretty positive. I think most European NATO members will say, but there was a sort of implication there at the end, which is, you know, I'm helping them stand on their own 2 feet for now, but the question is, if they spend successfully, will they not need that help, or will it be removed regardless in time, is I guess, the big one.
Well, I think what the other members of NATO will be hoping after the summit is that actually they had more reassurance from Donald Trump than they have done for quite some time now. And certainly there's been a real effort to flatter him, to get him on side. And I think that's perhaps the most extreme iteration of that, very cringy, frankly, hearing from Mark Rutte that language. But obviously it worked. Donald Trump liked it. He repeated it on his own social media, as we saw. And as you say, it does get to a fundamental truth that America is the world's biggest power, that European nations rely on America for protection. And yes, this has all been about how much that will continue to be the case. Donald Trump wants everyone to stand more on their own 2 feet, but fundamentally, American power is still going to be the background to whatever Europeans are able to do on their own defence.
Amanda, great stuff as always. Well done to Deborah Haynes as well yesterday. Now, the EU's defence commissioners warned Europe must be capable of building a drone army in case of an attack from Russia. Our Europe correspondent Siobhan Robbins has this special report.
Far from the trenches of Ukraine, war is being reimagined. This German startup is developing attack drones to help defend against Russia. They can carry a warhead powerful enough to destroy a tank and can travel at speeds of up to 250 kilometers an hour. So colloquially, we call these kamikaze drones, but in the business, they call them loitering munitions. And that's because you can fire this with a specific target and it will loiter in the air until it finds that target, and then it can strike. Russia's invasion of Ukraine sparked a revolution in warfare. Facing one of the world's strongest militaries, the Ukrainians used cheap, adaptable drone technology to their advantage. Ukraine says its drone units are now responsible for 80% of Russian frontline losses.
It's all made for easy handling for soldiers, so you don't have to use any tools on the front line.
Ukraine is testing systems like this as it continues to boost its arsenal. NATO allies need to catch up. Are European armies currently prepared for
a drone war like the one we're seeing playing out in Ukraine, which could be hundreds of drones hitting a city in a night?
Quite a lot of European armies start right now to develop or to purchase unmanned systems, and it's a good development, but it's all about time. How can we speed up?
And there's no time to lose. This is what a drone swarm can do to a city. As well as investing more in drones, NATO will massively boost air defences.
We see Russia's deadly terror from the skies over Ukraine every day. And we must be able to defend ourselves from such attacks.
While Russia's continued offensive means NATO members have agreed to boost defence spending to 5% of GDP, the EU's Defence Commissioner warns Europe must be capable of building a drone army.
The Russians can have around 5 million drones. So we need to have...
the Prime Minister's taken to the stage for his speech at the British Chamber of Commerce. Let's listen in.
For all of your leadership over 4 years now, it's really good to have been working with you. I know how valuable this chamber network is to UK PLC, representing us around the world, building your own communities brick by brick, creating the jobs, the wealth, the tax receipts that means that we have the opportunity to change our country for the better. And I want to begin by thanking you for all of that. Because, look, I fully acknowledge, and I do acknowledge here, that this year, as we've had to fix the foundations of our country, deal with the unprecedented mess that we inherited, we've asked a lot of you. I understand that, and I want to acknowledge that. It has made a huge difference. Because of it, the money's gone into the NHS and waiting lists are coming down. We've put investment into the skills of our young people, the new homes, new roads, new infrastructure that we're building. They are all vital for the long-term growth of our country. But none of that would have been possible without your contribution. And I say thank you. It's what I mean by partnership. It's what I spoke about, Siobhan, 2 years ago when I last came here. Because for me, this is not just dialogue. It's a partnership of us all, the British nation, facing down the challenges of a volatile world together. And it's a more volatile world than I think many of us have seen in many years. And frankly, the more I see the way this world is changing, the more I see the future that we must build. And the more convinced I am about the need for this unity, a sense between us of shared national purpose. And that is, I believe, how we can rise again together. And mark my words, we will. Take the spending review. This is a clear shift in the nature of this government, beyond fixing those inherited problems and now investing in the future of our country. We've, as it were, wiped the slate clean, we've stabilised the economy, and now we can go on to the next phase of government, building on that foundation, building a fairer Britain, change and renewal that you can feel. And that means, of course, that we have to back you to the hilt, because your members are the engines of growth in every community across the United Kingdom. And that's the responsibility of partnership. And we want to be the best state partner for enterprise anywhere in the world, and to give you the best possible conditions to succeed. And I am optimistic about this. And don't get me wrong, I know that the trading environment is not easy. The challenges that you face are front and centre of my mind. When I'm sitting across the negotiating table with the EU, with the US, with India, whoever it is, trust me, I'm fighting for you. And politics is about who do you have in your mind's eye. But together, I do believe we've got to stop doing that British understatement thing. And we do it all the time, including me. Because believe you me, this is a great moment to get on the phone to the world and say, take another look at Britain. I was speaking to Jensen Huang the other week, CEO of NVIDIA, the largest semiconductor company in the world. And he was saying Britain is in a Goldilocks situation on AI, ready to take off, a really good place to be investing. You can see it with Amazon this week. A massive £40 billion investment in our country, one of the biggest investments that's ever gone in. Thousands of jobs created in Hull, in the East Midlands, in Northampton. Which means that since July of last year, we've attracted over £120 billion into our economy. Now, you will all get this and understand this straight away. But these are companies that can invest anywhere in the world. They don't have to invest here, but they're choosing Britain. And that's a sign of confidence in our plan for change, that we are a stable partner, that we are open for business, that we are putting our money in your customers' pockets. And real wages are up more in the first 10 months of this government than they were in the first 10 years of the Tory era. 380,000 jobs have been created. More demand for your goods and your services. More opportunities to boost your bottom line. Because, and this is crucial, as we fix those foundations, we also made choices that will make us a fairer, more prosperous country. For example, as Siobhan mentioned, 2 years ago at this conference, I set out that bold vision in relation to planning reform, then leader of the opposition, to remove the blockages in the system, to build the labs, the warehouses, the grid connections that all of your businesses need. And 2 years later, standing here, that vision is written into legislation. And we're pushing it through Parliament. And every day new spades are hitting the ground. Growth revised up because of it. A promise made to you 2 years ago. A promise delivered. It's the same with our industrial strategy announced earlier this week. For far too long, Britain ignored this. We didn't back businesses. We didn't invest in projects and technology that are critical to our future. Didn't have a plan that gave your businesses the certainty that you need. Well, now we have that plan. And it's been drawn up in partnership. And it is, quote, a significant step forward for our economy. That's not my words, they're Siobhan's words. And as she says, and this to me was the most important part in Siobhan's response on your behalf, that what you shared with us, what you fed in, has been, quote, heard and reflected in our strategy. Your fingerprints are on that strategy. It came out of the discussions that I and others have had with many people in this room. It wasn't plucked out of the sky by a government. It was reflecting back what you had told us needed to change. And that is what I mean by partnership, where both partners do different things, bring different things to the table. It's a statement shared by other leaders. What Siobhan said wasn't just what Siobhan thought, what you thought. It was the sentiments of the CBI, of Enterprise Nation, the Federation of Small Businesses, Make UK, Small Business Britain, and the Startup Coalition, backing British business with significant investment in R&D, new technical colleges across the country, electricity bills slashed for more than 7,000 businesses. That'll make a massive difference. So many people in this room and elsewhere have said to me, it's the energy costs here, they're not competitive across Europe, we have to find a way to bring them down. That's what we've been able to do, to boost our competitiveness. A promise that we made and a promise that we have delivered. And across the country, it's the same story. Stripping out regulation that blocks investment. Pushing forward with radical devolution agenda. Investing in skills and making sure that that's devolved. Unlocking pension wealth to back British business. Building new infrastructure, the length and breadth of our country. Carbon capture projects in Merseyside, in Scotland, and along the East Coast. Nuclear in Nottinghamshire and, of course, at Sizewell. rail investment in Wales, a new runway at Heathrow, new metro schemes everywhere, from the North East to the West Midlands, Manchester, Sheffield and Leeds. And now today, another step, a new trade strategy that I am proud to launch at this conference, because there's no better place for that than with Britain's leading exporters, with you. It builds, as you would have expected, and of course, on the deals we've already struck with India, the United States and the European Union. The hat-trick, as I call it. And I've played defensive midfield all my life as a footballer. The last time I got a hat-trick, I think, was when the kids were about 7 and I could just about get the ball past them. So I'm going to take this particular hat-trick. But look, seriously, you don't need me to stand here and tell you how important these trade deals are. The EU SPS agreement on its own, it's a huge boost for food exporters and importers, driving down the cost base for retailers, reducing friction for our exports, a huge boost for the food industry. And I think a sign that partnership is not just empty rhetoric, that we're prepared to fight for your interests, prepared to make a political case for the growth and jobs that you can deliver. Small businesses, of course, as well as larger firms. And that EU-UK reset is so important on so many strands. There were 10 strands to that agreement. The SBS was one of them. There was the Defence and Security Partnership. Yesterday, I was at the NATO summit. We were increasing spending on defence across all of our allies. And because of the relationships that we've built, as people increase their spending, they're coming to us for discussion. They were doing it in the margins of the meetings yesterday, because they know that we have the ability to help them with the defence capability that they need to build. And it's therefore the EU-UK reset is about the strands that are in the deal, but it's also about the relationships that we're building that absolutely help and enable trade, and you will understand that. But that mindset is true of all the other deals. The US deal, hugely important for car manufacturing, particularly for companies like Jaguar Land Rover. And before we made the deal and after we made the deal, I went to Solihull, to JLR, a number of times to speak to the workers there and to look into their eyes. And I know how much it meant to them. Before the deal, they knew that trading at 27.5% tariffs into the North American market was really difficult. And they absolutely appreciated what that meant for them, for their jobs, for their families and their communities. And that's why when we got the deal done, when we got it over the line eventually last week, that signature, the CEO of JLR, Adrian Mardell, called me and made it crystal clear that thousands of jobs across the West Midlands had been saved. And then think of the supply chains that go with that, in logistics, in engineering, in freight. Think of the demand in the local economy, the cafes, the retailers, the pubs. And that is all true of that deal. It's why we had to be so focused to achieve that deal. The only country in the world to have got a trade deal with the US, something which we've been talking about for a very, very long time, is vital for the sectors that it protects. And that approach is true also of the India deal, again talked about for a very long time, but an unprecedented opportunity for UK PLC to access the world's fastest growing economy. And I've spoken to some of our whiskey and gin distillers about the India deal, and they've told me that their concern now is whether they can produce enough to meet the demand. What a great problem to have. What a great problem. It's a huge win for them. And under the India deal, tariffs for our car manufacturers slashed from over 100% to just 10%. The best terms of any country in the world. A deal which people said could never be done. That actually is true of all 3 deals. They said it wouldn't be possible to get a US deal. It wouldn't be possible to get an EU deal. If you had a US deal, you had to choose between the 2, and it certainly wouldn't be possible to get an India deal. And we've been able to get them, and that is brilliant for Britain and brilliant for you. And we'll go forward from here. And it's not just the terms of the trade deal. It's the signal that it sends about us, a transformation of our global brand. Because for years, the message the previous government was sending to the world was one of chaos, instability, the lack of courage to strike deals. Because when push comes to shove, in my view, they put politics before country. And together, we've now completely turned the page on that. With these 3 deals, we've rewritten our brand, restored our identity that even in this volatile world, Britain is proudly, unashamedly, defiantly even, open for business. And today's trade strategy builds on that. We're going to keep pushing, keep making deals, keep opening up new markets for you. We're expanding the capacity of our export credit agency by £20 billion. And I know how important that is for everyone in this room. We're launching a new Ricardo Fund. We will reduce trade friction for professionals in engineering, architecture, accountancy, and so much more, opening up £5 billion worth of export opportunities. Because trade isn't just about goods. We're a services superpower. So we'll back our exporting services as well, show more flexibility in that approach. And what we want to do is push not just for traditional trade agreements, but also for smaller deals that we can make quicker at pace, whether that's a digital trade agreement with Brazil, Thailand or Kenya, clean energy cooperation with the Philippines and Mexico, professional qualification recognition all around the world. But perhaps, most importantly, in this uncertain and challenging world, we will also give ourselves new powers on trade defence. Make sure that if your businesses are threatened by practices like dumping, that we have the right powers to defend you. And I'm determined that Britain becomes a global champion for free trade. I'm determined that we are the beacon for those values. And frankly, I think our actions already speak louder than any words. But in a world where things can change quickly, as you've seen in the recent days, we've seen in sectors like steel that protection measures do need to be put in place, then we have to be ready to back British business. And that is what we've done on trade. That is what we will do in the future, right across our economy. Businesses creating wealth in every community, and a Labour government investing in the skills, the infrastructure, the future that we need to build. A partnership in the national interest, driving us forward, delivering change and renewal, putting more money in the pockets of working people. That is the change that we can deliver together, a Britain that is back in business. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Prime Minister just wrapping up his introductory speech there at the British Chamber of Commerce. He's going to take a Q&A, which we're going to monitor now. He was talking up there his hat-trick of trade deals that he, of course, has secured a renegotiation with the EU, the US and India, talking as well about having listened to this gathering of business leaders and responded to deliver accordingly. Of course, he's fresh back from NATO, and he's also facing threats to his welfare reform bill. Lots to discuss with the former Home Secretary and former Foreign Secretary, Sir James Cleverly, who joins me now. I'm delighted to say a very good morning to you, Sir James.
Good morning, good morning.
Thanks very much for joining us. I don't know where we could start on this, but potentially, why don't we dwell there on his hat-trick of trade deals that he was just talking about. We could focus all day long on the minor details and the extent to which they're fully enforced yet or not. But you've been having to negotiate with the international leaders. It's quite hard to do those trio all at once.
Well, it's interesting he described it as a trio. Let's unpick that for a bit. The arrangement with the US is not a trade deal. It's a few lines of concessions on global tariffs. The EU trade deal already existed, and 99% of the India trade deal was negotiated under Kemi Badnoch. So whilst there are positives, that he claims credit for those trade deals, and he claims credit for billions of pounds worth of inward investment. Again, deals which were negotiated under the previous Conservative government. And he's clutching at these headlines because what we saw in that speech was an incredibly downbeat, slow, ponderous. He's got very little to say to business because what the people in that room will know, what they will feel, is that he's put up the tax on employment, which means we're losing jobs. He has not really done anything to liberate those businesses to really innovate. He is a drag anchor on British business, and warm words, poorly delivered, will not paper over those cracks.
It did announce certainly a significant investment from Amazon earlier this week, which he was touching on. Obviously, he's fresh back from the NATO summit. A good summit?
Well, I think he has joined in with what I think has largely been driven by President Trump, which is a very significant increase in the commitment for defence spending. But he's been dragged there against his will. We, myself included, were saying that we need to increase defence spending summer of last year. We've had a very, very, very slow response to that from the Labour Party. We had a strategic defence review that had no money underpinning it whatsoever. We're now getting a headline commitment, but no detail where that money comes from. And a plan without a budget is not a plan. And so we're going to be looking very closely to see where that money comes from. And linking to the other big story of the day, which is the huge Labour rebellion on welfare, if he can't even get that changed through Parliament, there is no way he's going to free up the money to honour the commitment he's just made in The Hague.
Let's come to welfare in a moment. But on the NATO summit, I mean, clearly defence spending did not increase before they came to power, and it has increased since. So it's all relative in terms of how fast they're going compared to the last government. But on the NATO summit itself, do you commend Donald Trump when you look at the fact that NATO as a whole is committing to spend now, different countries will get there at different paces, way more on defence than we were at any point in the last decade. And his, at times, sort of aggressive tactics towards NATO members, has it worked?
Well, it's clearly worked in that there is now a commitment to a very significant increase in defence spending. I'm going to pull you up on a detail. Under the Conservatives, defence spending as a proportion of GDP was heading up. Now, it's needed to accelerate because of a very significant change in geo-global affairs, including Russia's brutal invasion of Ukraine. So it's right that that increase has happened. But US presidents...
It ticked up at the back end of your government.
But it did go up. But it did go up.
It ticked up. And you're criticising, and they've ticked it up more already, and it's got to go up faster to meet this pledge.
Indeed. But the point is, it was going up. There was plans under the Conservatives for it to go up further. So you weren't right to say that it hadn't gone up under the Conservatives. But the broader point is that whether you like his style or not, many US presidents have tried to get NATO countries to commit to greater defence spending with very limited success. President Trump, in a uniquely President Trump way, which can be sometimes quite difficult to deal with as an international partner, has made a step change. And I think that has got to be seen as a positive. In the UK, what we now have to do is see where the money is going to come from. Because if Labour, if Starmer, cannot even free up a few billions from getting a grip of the welfare budget, there is no way that he's going to get to that 5% on defence and security spending.
Why don't we move on to welfare? There's some other foreign things I want to touch on, but let's move on to the welfare reform bill. I mean, this is an area that your party struggled to reform in a significant way, and obviously the amount spent on it rose significantly post the pandemic. Do you have some sympathy with the difficulty that the government has to try and push through something that might be needed but is always going to be unpopular?
I completely understand this is difficult. Completely understand. And as you say, COVID, which was a unique set of circumstances, really distorted the welfare system. We saw a very, very large increase in welfare. One of the points I've made is if we could get the welfare bill back to where it was pre-pandemic levels, that would free up enough money to honour our defence commitments and also give businesses, for example, a bit of ease with regard to the taxation burden upon them. So no one's pretending it is easy, but the proposals that Labour are putting forward are themselves fairly modest, and they're already looking as if they're going to be watered down even further. And the point is, this is a Labour Prime Minister, less than a year after a general election, with a record majority who is now being held hostage by his own backbenchers, totally incapable, it seems, of delivering even a fairly modest reduction in the welfare bill, which is needed now perhaps more than any time in recent history. And if he can't do that, then what's the point of him? And we will look very carefully to see whether he can actually lead his party or whether he's going to be led around by his party.
Clearly, this issue is one that they're working out how to address. We had a YouGov poll this morning, and it showed if an election was held today, the number of seats Labour would have would halve to 178. It said that your party's seats would fall to 46. What do you make of that?
Well, look, whenever we see polls like that, it is disconcerting. And there's one of two things you can do. You can cry yourself to sleep, or you can do something about it. And we are absolutely under Kemi, under the shadow ministerial team, and actually the wider party, we are setting about repairing the functions of the Conservative Party. We're setting our agenda forward because we need to rebuild the trust between our party and the British people. And I completely recognise at the last general election, the British people said, right, out. But I also know that we have a duty to protect the British people. I have no doubt that Reform would be completely incapable of not only running the country, even forming a government. No one knows who their ministerial team would be. We're now seeing, because a county council leader resigning in 41 days, an 18-year-old taking control of a county council. I'm willing to give him the benefit of the doubt, but I'm not quite sure that's really what voters would derive comfort from. So I don't believe that Reform are a credible party of government. That's not to say we disregard some of the points that they're making or some of the way they're grabbing the attention of the media and the public. We should learn from that. But they are not a credible party of government, and this country needs good government, and they're definitely not getting it from the Labour Party.
You know, clearly you had 14 years in government and then had a big election loss. A year on from an election loss, was it par for the course that the polling would be as bad as it is for you at the moment, or have mistakes been made in the last year?
Well, it's really difficult in opposition to grab the attention of the British people. And we recognise that. And leaders of the opposition immediately prior to an election defeat have always found this the case. And William Hague, who is regarded, I think, now as an incredibly effective politician, really struggled initially as leader of the opposition to get the attention of the British people. So it's always hard. Reform, Nigel Farage is very good at grabbing the attention, so we need to compete to get the mind space of the British voters. But we are the only credible party of alternative government, and we need to not just say that, we need to persuade the British people that that is true. That will take a little bit of time, but we're not hanging around. Yeah. We're working on that immediately.
I mean, William Hague didn't last as leader. You said at the top, what is the point of Keir Starmer if he can't do X, Y and Z? You're framing. What is the point of your Conservative leader if, in light of all of these opportunities, let's say, in the first year that the government's provided you, that she can't grab attention?
So William Hague was up against Tony Blair, and whilst I don't agree with Tony Blair, was probably one of the most talented politicians of his generation. Keir Starmer is no Tony Blair.
And yet you're struggling in the polls. This is your framing between Blair and Starmer.
But the point is, also what William Hague didn't have to contend with was another political party claiming to be right of centre. I have my doubts with regard to Reform, particularly as they are now seeking to have a bidding war with the Labour Party about how quickly they can squander hard-working taxpayers' money. But the point is, we recognise as Conservatives that we need to not just highlight the ineptitude of the Labour government, we also need to compete for the ears, hearts and minds of the British voters with Reform. We are doing that, and we will highlight the ineptitude of Labour in government, the inappropriateness of Nigel Farage and his party of backing singers to run the country, and simultaneously put our own house in order so we can be that credible alternative government at the next set of elections. It's not easy and it's not immediate, but we are focused on that. Kemi's focused on that. We're all focused on that, and that's what we're going to do.
So I guess just the last one on this topic, had you been leader, the MRP poll this morning would also say 46 seats.
So there is literally no point at all at doing these kind of alternative histories. We had a leadership campaign. Kemi won fair and square. Of course, I was upset and grumpy for a few days after I got knocked out, but I'm a big boy. I get over it. And I'm now working to support my party leader and my party, highlight the deficiencies of the others in the field, and give ourselves the very, very, very best chance to win at local government level in the forthcoming elections and at the general election when it comes up.
I had a final big picture question. What was your biggest regret when you were in government? Something that you could have done better or didn't do that you would have liked to have done?
Well, I think one of the things that played hugely in the general election was border control. I think that's something that perhaps if we'd looked at a broader spectrum of responses, perhaps earlier on in the process, we would have had a better time of that. My frustration is that the Labour Party, with their very much not invented here mindset, tore up a number of things that I put in place, including the Safety Rwanda Bill, that partnership, the deterrent that came with that partnership, tore that up without having anything to replace it with. And I regret not locking some of those things in more tightly, because what we're now seeing is, because Labour undid the work that we did, a difficult situation has got even worse still. And the final point is the asylum centre in my constituency in Wethersfield looks now as if it's going to be expanded, despite what Labour said prior to the election, because they undid so much of the work that I put in place when I was Home Secretary.
Sir James, we're out of time. Thanks so much for joining us. Good to see you. Sir James Cleverly, the former Foreign and Home Secretary. We're going to take a quick break here on The Breakfast Show. When we come back, we're going to talk about that top story of the day, potential side effects of weight loss jabs. Our science correspondent, Thomas Moore, is here on that.
I'm Stephen Murphy, and I'm Sky's Ireland correspondent based here in Dublin. The waters of Ireland and Britain should be home to great white sharks. If there are great white sharks in this area, there's no reason they wouldn't come here to feed. It's basically a buffet on a beach.
This could be not only a record-breaking storm, but potentially the most dangerous storm ever to hit Ireland.
Welcome back. As you can see, Thomas Moore, our science correspondent, is here because we're going to return now to our top story, the potential side effects of weight loss jabs after 10 people died and hundreds of others reported problems with their pancreas. Let's first of all listen to GP Sonia Adesera and the Chief Safety Officer of the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulator, Alison Kay, both of whom joined us a little earlier.
One side effect which is, although uncommon, maybe more serious, is something called acute pancreatitis, and that's an inflammation of your pancreas. And this may be serious, and it's useful for me if I might just take a minute to explain to people what the main symptom of this may be, which is a severe pain in the stomach, which then may radiate to the back and doesn't go away. And if anyone who experiences should seek immediate medical help.
I have many patients who are getting these drugs online, from online pharmacies, sometimes from the black market, and they're telling me that they're taking these medicines. And I actually have found that a lot of these patients, not all of them are having proper checks and health checks. Some of them are not actually obese or that overweight, and many young people are being started on these medications without proper checks.
As I said, Thomas is here to tell us a bit more about this. So firstly, Thomas, the timing seems sort of bizarre that this would be announced today, 3 days after it became available on the NHS. But it's not like they've suddenly discovered these instances over the course of the last week or so.
No, so even when they were doing the clinical trials, before these drugs were licensed, they were picking up some cases of inflamed pancreas. So they knew that this was going to be something they would have to put on the list of side effects that goes out on the patient safety leaflet. And as more people are taking them around the world, more people are in fact developing pancreatitis. So we shouldn't be too surprised by that, but they need to understand more, which is why they're going to start looking at the genes to see if there are some things that make people more likely to develop this problem. I think we have to remember that all medicines have side effects, that it is about risk and benefit. So if you have type 2 diabetes or a severe obesity, the benefits are very clear. They lead to rapid weight loss, about 20% of your body weight over 3 to 6 months. They stabilise blood sugar, they reduce heart disease. So lots of benefits. But if you're just trying to get beach body ready or something like that, lose a few pounds ahead of the summer, then the benefits are much less clear. And this research should give people pause for thought.
And in terms of the sort of percentage of people in this country that are already on the drug, because it's only just becoming available on the NHS, is the vast majority thus far people that are, I guess we can't guess their motivations, but they're going about it themselves as opposed to necessarily waiting till a doctor prescribes it, saying you really need to take this?
There are very few people, and we've found this in our own research, very few people who are managing to get these drugs on the NHS. The NHS really hasn't got a handle on the great benefits of using these drugs. Most people are going on themselves to online pharmacies, and there should be checks of their BMI, their body mass index, and various other factors to show that they are eligible for treatment. But we know that there are some people who are managing to get hold of these drugs against the medical rules, and that is where people are potentially developing the risks without seeing any benefits.
Well, I mean, the sceptic in me on the timing, I mean, if announcing this further review 4 days after it became available in the NHS is almost as if, and the messaging we heard there, it's almost as if you're saying, well, this is needed for medical reasons, but we need more of the supplies to go to that and not to personal use, and let's put out a warning a few days later. I mean, is that ridiculous scepticism?
Look, I think what we're seeing now is that people, certainly from GPs, it's only going to be available to those with a BMI of 40. Now, that is people who are very obese and also have at least 4 other weight-related conditions. So the gate is very small for people to actually get hold of these drugs on the NHS through GPs. But the problem is this wild west of online pharmacies. Some are very good, but we know that some people getting hold of these drugs when they shouldn't be taking them. And that is why they are concerned. And I suppose this is a warning message for them that they really need to think very carefully about whether it's worth losing a few pounds on these very potent medications that not only affect your appetite, but can affect the brain and various other receptors around the body. And doctors still don't fully understand how these drugs work. So you do need to think very carefully whether these are right for you.
Thomas, thanks as always. Thomas Moore there. Let's have a look at the weather.
The perfect climate, wherever the destination. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
It's going to be unsettled into the next week, especially in the north and the west, and it will turn warm again after that. It's mostly warm and humid now, with outbreaks of rain over northern and western Britain and showers for eastern England. But Ireland and Northern Ireland are mostly fine. Britain will see increasingly showery rain clearing across the east this morning, with more scattered showers following, but western parts will turn mainly dry and sunny. Ireland and Northern Ireland, meanwhile, will see a few showers developing, and it will be a bit cooler and fresher.
The perfect climate, whatever the forecast. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
A minute or so left. Amanda's here. Amanda, big speech by the Prime Minister. We wondered, would we get a hint of any kind of thoughts he's got since getting back from NATO on the welfare issue? But I guess we didn't.
No, not really. He very much focused on the trade deals he struck, talked a bit about defence spending and so on. But no, the big question really is this rebellion that he's been ambushed with by MPs on his own side, returning from all his activity on the global stage. And now he's got a third or so of his own MPs threatening to rebel over a key government bill, welfare reform.
He's going to make a statement in Parliament today, but again, that's relating to NATO-related developments.
It seems to be, although the question will be whether any MPs manage to try and get a question in on this. Certainly the reaction we've been getting from those who signed that rebel amendment so far seems to be some of them saying we're glad that our concerns are being listened to. We never wanted this to be a vote of confidence in the Prime Minister. Others saying, no, nothing cuts it. We wanted them to scrap the whole bill.
Amanda, great stuff. Thanks so much. We're out of time here on The Breakfast Show. Up next, it's Sky News Today.
We're rolling.
Welcome to the world.
Our new podcast. It's starting now. It's very exciting. Every week, we'll be reporting from the world's trouble spots.
We get to hold those in positions of power accountable, and we get to ask the questions that the audience, the listeners, want to know about.
And that's why it is so important that people tune in, come along for the road, come along for the journey. It'll be fun.